There is a quiet part of your mind that never sleeps. It decides what you desire, what you fear, and what you avoid long before you are aware of making a choice. Right now, as you listen, it is already at work, shaping your thoughts from behind the scenes. Over a century ago, one man suggested something unsettling, that consciousness is only a thin surface, and beneath it lies a vast, hidden world, a place where memories are buried, impulses are disguised, and conflicts continue silently, even while you believe you are calm. You may think you choose your actions freely, but what if many of your decisions are echoes of forgotten childhood moments? What if your anxiety is not random, but the result of an internal struggle you cannot see? And what if your dreams are not meaningless stories, but carefully distorted messages from a deeper intelligence within you? The unconscious mind does not speak in words. It speaks in symbols, in habits, in emotional reactions that seem to arrive without explanation. It protects you, even when that protection creates discomfort. It hides what feels dangerous, even when what is hidden continues to shape your life. Tonight, we will move gently beneath the surface. We will explore the architecture of the unconscious, the mechanisms that defend the mind, the dreams that reveal what waking awareness cannot tolerate, and the silent forces that influence your sense of self without ever asking permission. This is not a journey into fear. It is a journey into understanding. Because when the unconscious is no longer completely hidden, the mind no longer needs to work so hard to protect itself. As awareness deepens, tension softens. As insight grows, the nervous system relaxes. And as the hidden becomes gently illuminated, the mind begins to rest. So allow your attention to drift inward. You do not need to analyze. You do not need to remember. Just listen and let the unconscious reveal itself slowly, safely, and quietly. At the end of the 19th century, when science believed it was steadily illuminating every corner of human experience, Freud introduced an idea that moved in the opposite direction. He suggested that the most important forces shaping human behavior were not the ones we could see, measure, or consciously control, but those that operated in darkness. Beneath thoughts, intentions, and rational decisions, he proposed the existence of a vast inner domain, a mental territory that worked silently, continuously, and independently of awareness. This idea unsettled the scientific world because it implied that the conscious mind was not the master of its own house. Freud did not arrive at this conclusion through philosophy alone. He was trained as a physician, deeply interested in neurology, anatomy, and empirical observation. What led him beyond the visible brain into the invisible mind were patients whose symptoms made no biological sense. Paralysis without injury, blindness without damage to the eyes, physical pain with no detectable cause. These symptoms behaved as if the body were expressing something the mind could not say. Freud began to suspect that consciousness was only the surface expression of a much deeper psychological process. Through careful listening rather than physical examination, Freud noticed patterns. Patients spoke of forgotten memories, fragmented dreams, and emotional reactions that felt disproportionate to present circumstances. Again and again, symptoms appeared connected to experiences the patient claimed not to remember or insisted were unimportant. Freud proposed something radical for his time, that the mind actively hides certain experiences from awareness, not because they are gone, but because they are psychologically threatening. This hidden activity, he argued, was not passive forgetting, but an active process of repression. The unconscious, in Freud's view, was not a quiet storage room for memories. It was dynamic, energetic, and purposeful. Thoughts pushed down did not dissolve. Desires denied did not disappear. They continued to seek expression, finding indirect pathways through dreams, slips of the tongue, anxiety, compulsions, and physical symptoms. Consciousness, rather than being the controller, became the negotiator, managing what could be allowed into awareness and what had to remain hidden to preserve psychological stability. This idea fundamentally changed how the mind was understood. Before Freud, mental life was largely equated with conscious thought. To think was to know was to control. Freud fractured this assumption. He suggested that much of what feels like free choice is shaped by processes that never announce themselves. The unconscious mind, he argued, does not ask permission. It influences behavior silently, shaping preferences, fears, attachments, and aversions long before conscious reasoning enters the scene. Freud also challenged the comforting belief that self-awareness guarantees self-knowledge. According to his model, the mind is layered not by accident, but by necessity. Consciousness exists to function in reality, while the unconscious holds impulses and memories that reality cannot easily accommodate. This division protects the individual from overwhelming emotion, but it comes at a cost. What is hidden does not rest. It continues to act, often in ways that confuse or disturb the conscious mind. What made Freud's proposal so powerful was not just its explanatory reach, but its emotional implication. If much of mental life happens outside awareness, then symptoms are not signs of weakness or failure, but signals. Anxiety becomes communication. Dreams become symbolic language. Emotional patterns become traces of unresolved inner conflict. The unconscious, in this sense, is not an enemy of the self, but a part of it, one that speaks in a different dialect, shaped by memory, desire, and defense, rather than logic. With this shift, the human mind was no longer a transparent system. It became layered, conflicted, and deeply symbolic. Freud's concept of the unconscious marked the beginning of a new way of listening, not just to what people said, but to what emerged indirectly through silence, repetition, and emotional intensity. From this point forward, understanding the mind meant learning how to listen to what consciousness itself could not hear. And with that realization, a new map of the inner world quietly came into existence. To explain how such a powerful, hidden mental world could coexist with ordinary awareness, Freud turned to metaphor. He asked the mind to be imagined not as a single space, but as a layered structure, one in which visibility does not equal importance. The image he offered was simple and quietly unsettling. An iceberg floating in the sea. Only a small portion is visible above the surface, while the vast majority remains submerged, massive, and unseen. In this image, consciousness is only the tip. Everything else that gives it shape and direction lies beneath. The conscious mind, in this model, is the narrow zone of immediate awareness. It contains what you are thinking, feeling, or perceiving right now. Sensations, deliberate thoughts, and chosen actions pass through this layer. Yet, its capacity is limited. Consciousness can hold only a small number of elements at once, and it operates largely in the present moment. Freud emphasized that this visible layer feels dominant not because it controls the mind, but because it is the only part that can announce itself directly. Just beneath consciousness lies the preconscious, a transitional zone that feels deceptively simple. This layer contains thoughts, memories, and information that are not currently in awareness, but can become conscious without resistance. A name you have not thought about in years, a memory that surfaces when prompted, a feeling that emerges when attention turns inward. The preconscious acts as a buffer, regulating the flow of mental material between what is hidden and what is allowed to appear. What makes the preconscious psychologically important is its role as a gatekeeper. It determines what may safely rise into awareness and what must remain submerged. This process is not neutral. It is shaped by emotional significance, social acceptability, and internal conflict. Material that carries little emotional charge passes easily. Material associated with discomfort, shame, fear, or forbidden desire encounters resistance. This resistance marks the boundary between the preconscious and the unconscious. The unconscious, in Freud's model, forms the largest and most influential layer of the mind. It contains wishes, impulses, memories, and conflicts that consciousness cannot tolerate directly. These contents are not inaccessible by accident. They are actively kept out of awareness because their presence would generate anxiety, guilt, or psychological destabilization. The unconscious is therefore not simply unknown, it is times defended against asterisk. Despite being hidden, the unconscious is not silent. It expresses itself indirectly, shaping behavior from below the surface. Freud argued that slips of the tongue, recurring dreams, irrational fears, compulsive behaviors, and unexplained emotional reactions are all manifestations of unconscious material seeking expression. Because it cannot speak openly, the unconscious communicates symbolically. Its logic is not linear, but associative, emotional, and timeless. A crucial aspect of this layered model is that the unconscious does not recognize contradiction or chronology in the way consciousness does. Past experiences do not fade with time. Childhood emotions can remain fully alive decades later, influencing adult relationships as if no time has passed. The iceberg does not melt beneath the surface. It retains its mass, pressing upward continuously, shaping what appears above even when its presence is denied. This structure explains why self-understanding can feel incomplete even when one reflects deeply. Conscious insight alone cannot access what is actively defended against. The mind is not designed to reveal everything to itself at once. Its layered architecture prioritizes psychological survival over transparency. The iceberg model thus reframes inner conflict not as failure, but as structure, a system designed to keep the individual functioning, even if that functioning comes at the cost of clarity. By introducing these layers, Freud offered more than a theory of memory. He offered a new way of understanding inner tension. When thoughts feel fragmented, when emotions feel disconnected from their apparent causes, or when patterns repeat despite conscious intention, the iceberg model provides a quiet explanation. Most of what moves the mind is happening below the surface, and understanding the mind, Freud suggested, begins not by staring harder at the tip, but by learning how to listen to the depths that remain unseen. At the center of Freud's model of the unconscious lies a mechanism, both protective and costly repression. Repression is not simple forgetting. It is an active psychological process through which the mind pushes certain thoughts, memories, and impulses out of awareness because their presence would be emotionally overwhelming. These contents are not weak or insignificant. They are often intense, charged, and deeply connected to early experience. The mind does not repress what is neutral. It represses what threatens stability. Freud observed that repression usually begins early in life, long before conscious reasoning is fully developed. A child encounters emotions it cannot yet understand: fear, anger, desire, jealousy, often in situations where expressing these feelings would risk loss of love, safety, or approval. The mind learns, quietly and efficiently, that certain experiences must not be felt fully. Rather than resolving them, it hides them. Repression becomes a form of emotional survival, allowing the child to continue functioning within its environment. What makes repression so powerful is that it does not eliminate what it hides. The repressed material remains alive, carrying its original emotional energy. Because it has been denied direct expression, it seeks indirect pathways. Freud described this as a constant internal pressure, a force pushing upward from the unconscious, attempting to enter awareness. Consciousness, in turn, resists this pressure, creating a dynamic tension that shapes mental life. This tension explains why repression is rarely silent. The mind pays a price for keeping material out of awareness. That price often appears as anxiety, fatigue, irritability, or a vague sense of unease without a clear cause. The energy required to maintain repression is continuous. It does not pause. Even when the individual feels calm on the surface, the unconscious effort of keeping certain contents hidden can drain psychological resources. Repressed material also distorts behavior in subtle ways. Freud noticed that people often repeat patterns they consciously wish to avoid. They enter similar relationships, react strongly to specific triggers, or sabotage situations that resemble earlier emotional conflicts. These repetitions are not accidents. They are attempts by the unconscious to resolve unfinished business without revealing its source directly. The mind reenacts what it cannot remember. One of the most unsettling aspects of repression is that the conscious mind usually believes it is in control. Because the repressed material is hidden, its influence is misattributed. Anxiety seems to arise for no reason. Anger appears disproportionate. Desire feels confusing or misplaced. Freud argued that this misattribution deepens suffering because it prevents understanding. The mind struggles against symptoms without knowing what they are protecting it from. Repression also reshapes perception. The mind becomes selective, filtering reality in ways that avoid contact with hidden material. Certain topics feel uncomfortable. Certain memories feel vague or distant. Certain emotions feel strangely muted. These are not gaps in memory by chance. They are signs of psychological boundaries, actively maintained. The unconscious does not forget what has been repressed. It guards it. Importantly, Freud did not view repression as pathological in itself. It is a normal and necessary function of the mind. Without repression, consciousness would be flooded with conflicting impulses and memories it could not integrate. The problem arises when repression becomes rigid, when large portions of emotional life remain inaccessible for too long. In such cases, Symptoms multiply because the unconscious must work harder to express what has been silenced. Understanding repression changes how inner struggle is interpreted. Symptoms are no longer meaningless disruptions. They are compromises, imperfect solutions created by the mind to balance expression and protection. Anxiety becomes a signal that something is being held back. Emotional numbness becomes a sign of overprotection. The unconscious is not sabotaging the individual. It is attempting to preserve equilibrium using the only tools it has. Freud's insight into repression reframed suffering itself. Rather than asking, "What is wrong with me?" the question becomes, "What is my mind trying to keep me from feeling?" This shift replaces judgment with curiosity. It suggests that beneath discomfort lies not chaos, but an intelligent system managing conflict quietly, continuously, and often at great cost. And in recognizing repression, the first doorway into the unconscious begins to open not through force, but through understanding. As repression continues over time, it does not remain an isolated mechanism operating in the background. It begins to shape the entire architecture of the personality. What the mind repeatedly pushes away does not simply disappear into silence. It reorganizes the way the individual thinks, feels, relates, and reacts. Freud argued that personality is not built only from what is expressed, but just as powerfully from what is forbidden, avoided, or never allowed to become conscious. In this sense, the unconscious is not beneath the personality, it is woven into it. Repressed material exerts influence precisely because it is hidden. Since it cannot be examined directly, it operates without correction or reflection. A fear that is not acknowledged cannot be reassured. A desire that is not recognized cannot be negotiated. Instead, these forces shape behavior indirectly, steering choices in ways that feel instinctive or inevitable. The individual may believe they are simply that kind of person, unaware that many traits are adaptive responses to long-standing inner conflicts. Over time, the mind develops characteristic patterns to keep repressed material at a safe distance. Certain emotions may be consistently muted, while others become exaggerated. Some individuals appear overly controlled, rational, or detached, while others seem impulsive, anxious, or emotionally intense. Freud suggested that these traits are not random. They are compromises, stable ways of living that minimize the risk of repressed content breaking through into awareness. Personality becomes a defensive structure as much as an expressive one. This defensive shaping often reveals itself through symptoms. Symptoms are not failures of the mind, they are solutions. When repressed material presses for expression and consciousness resists, the result is a compromise, formation, anxiety, obsession, phobia, compulsion, or physical symptom. The symptom allows partial expression while keeping the underlying conflict hidden. It is meaningful precisely because it is distorted. The mind speaks in code when it cannot speak directly. Freud observed that symptoms often feel irrational because their logic belongs to the unconscious rather than conscious thought. A harmless situation triggers panic. A minor criticism feels devastating. A repetitive behavior feels impossible to stop. From the conscious perspective, these reactions make no sense. From the unconscious perspective, they are precise. They are linked to earlier emotional situations that were never fully processed and therefore remain active, waiting for symbolic reenactment. One of the most exhausting aspects of repression is that it requires constant energy. The mind must remain vigilant, monitoring thoughts, memories, and feelings to prevent forbidden material from surfacing. This vigilance contributes to chronic fatigue, tension, and a sense of inner strain that has no obvious external cause. Even when life appears calm, the psyche may be working continuously to maintain internal balance. Rest becomes difficult because the unconscious conflict does not rest. Repressed material also shapes relationships. Freud noticed that people often repeat emotional dynamics from early life, unconsciously assigning roles to others that resemble figures from their past. Love, authority, abandonment, and rejection are replayed without awareness of their origin. These repetitions feel compelling because they are driven by unresolved, unconscious material seeking recognition. The individual is not choosing the pattern is choosing the individual. Importantly, the unconscious does not distinguish between past and present. A conflict formed in childhood may influence adult behavior as if it were happening now. Emotional reactions feel immediate and intense because, psychologically, they are. Time has not softened them. They were never integrated into conscious narrative. Repression freezes experience in its original emotional form, allowing it to resurface repeatedly in disguised ways. Freud emphasized that insight alone is not enough to dissolve these patterns. Simply knowing that something is repressed does not immediately free the mind. What matters is gradually allowing what was hidden to be felt, symbolized, and understood within a safe framework. Until then, repression continues to organize experience silently, shaping identity from behind the scenes. Understanding the cost of hiding reframes inner struggle once again. Symptoms are no longer enemies to eliminate, but messages pointing toward what has been protected for too long. Personality traits are no longer fixed characteristics, but adaptive responses that once served a purpose. The unconscious is revealed not as a dark force undermining the self, but as a keeper of unfinished emotional truth. And in recognizing how deeply repression shapes the mind, the path toward integration, slow, careful, and compassionate, quietly begins. When Freud spoke of repressed desires, he was not referring only to dramatic or extreme impulses. He was pointing to something far more subtle and far more common: the everyday wishes, emotions, and longings that the mind quietly decides are unacceptable. These desires are not rejected because they are rare, but because they conflict with love, morality, safety, or self-image. The mind learns early that wanting certain things can threaten attachment or approval, and so it begins to refuse those wants on behalf of survival. Repression, in this sense, is not about weakness. It is about adaptation. From childhood onward, desire is shaped by consequence. A child may learn that anger risks abandonment, that curiosity invites punishment, or that affection expressed too freely creates discomfort. The mind responds intelligently. It does not eliminate the desire, it hides it. Freud emphasized that desire is a fundamental psychic energy. It cannot be destroyed. When blocked from conscious expression, it is redirected, disguised, or displaced. The unconscious becomes the refuge where forbidden wanting continues to exist without threatening the individual's sense of safety. What makes repressed desire so powerful is that it does not feel like desire anymore. Once hidden, it transforms. It may appear as anxiety, irritability, guilt, or an unexplained sense of dissatisfaction. The individual no longer recognizes the original wish, only the emotional disturbance it creates. Freud argued that many people suffer not because they want too much, but because they no longer know what they want at all. The desire has been pushed so far from awareness that its presence is felt only through tension. Repressed desires also shape behavior indirectly. A person may consistently avoid intimacy without understanding why, or pursue success compulsively without satisfaction. These patterns are not random. They are structured attempts to negotiate with hidden wishes. The mind seeks substitutes, achievements, routines, habits that allow partial expression without confronting the original desire directly. Yet substitutes rarely satisfy completely. The unconscious continues to press for recognition, repeating the pattern in different forms. Freud noted that desire becomes most visible when repression weakens. Dreams, slips of the tongue, humor, and moments of emotional overwhelm often reveal what the conscious mind refuses to acknowledge. A joke that goes too far, a sudden reaction that feels out of character, a dream that lingers emotionally long after waking. These are not accidents. They are brief openings where desire surfaces without permission, quickly retreating once consciousness regains control. One of the most difficult aspects of repressed desire is the shame that surrounds it. Because these wishes were hidden to preserve belonging, acknowledging them can feel dangerous even in adulthood. The individual may fear that recognizing a desire means acting on it, losing control, or becoming someone unacceptable. Freud challenged this fear directly. He argued that awareness does not equal action. In fact, repression increases the risk of uncontrolled expression, while understanding creates choice. Desire, in the unconscious, does not follow adult logic. It is often rooted in early emotional states, where boundaries were unclear and needs were absolute. A longing for attention may feel endless. A wish for closeness may feel urgent. When these desires are repressed rather than integrated, they remain frozen in their original intensity. The adult mind then struggles to manage emotions that belong to a much earlier stage of psychological development. This mismatch creates inner conflict and confusion. Freud believed that many forms of anxiety originate here not from danger in the present, but from desire in the past that remains unresolved. Anxiety acts as a warning signal, alerting the mind that something forbidden is approaching consciousness. The individual experiences discomfort without understanding its source. The more the desire presses upward, the more anxiety increases, reinforcing repression and deepening the cycle. Understanding repressed desire changes the meaning of inner struggle. Restlessness becomes a sign of blocked wanting. Emptiness becomes a signal of disconnection from authentic impulse. Repetition becomes an attempt to resolve something that has never been allowed to speak clearly. Freud's insight was not that humans are driven by dangerous desires, but that they suffer when desire is forced to live in disguise. When the mind begins to recognize what it has refused to want, something shifts quietly. Desire loses its threatening quality. It becomes information rather than force. The unconscious no longer needs to shout through symptoms when it is allowed to whisper through awareness. In this sense, acknowledging repressed desire is not an act of indulgence, but an act of psychological relief, one that allows the mind to rest from the exhausting task of hiding from itself. When a desire is repressed, it does not remain in its original form. The unconscious is not a passive container that simply stores forbidden wishes. It is an active system that reshapes them. Freud described this transformation as a kind of psychological disguise. The mind alters the appearance of desire so that it can move through awareness without triggering alarm. What emerges on the surface may look unrelated to the original impulse, yet it carries the same emotional charge, redirected and reshaped to remain acceptable. This disguising process explains why people often feel driven by urges they do not understand. A persistent restlessness may hide a wish for freedom. A strong moral rigidity may conceal forbidden curiosity. Excessive caretaking may mask unmet dependency needs. The unconscious does not eliminate desire, it reroutes it. Freud emphasized that this rerouting is creative, symbolic, and often remarkably precise. The mind finds pathways that allow partial satisfaction while preserving repression. One of the most common disguises is displacement. Here, the emotional energy of a desire is shifted from its original object to a safer substitute. Anger that cannot be expressed toward a loved figure may emerge as irritation towards strangers. Longing that feels dangerous may appear as ambition, perfectionism, or chronic dissatisfaction. The individual experiences the emotion clearly, but its true origin remains hidden. This misalignment creates confusion because the response feels real but misplaced. Another form of disguise is symbolization. The unconscious communicates through images rather than explanations. Desires appear in dreams as metaphors: a locked room, a journey, a missing object, a recurring figure. These symbols are not random. They are shaped by personal history and emotional significance. Freud argued that dreams are the royal road to the unconscious, precisely because they allow desire to express itself indirectly, bypassing the censorship of waking consciousness. Disguised desire also appears in repetitive behavior. People find themselves returning to the same emotional situations, even when those situations cause distress. The repetition is not self-sabotage in the moral sense. It is an attempt at resolution. The unconscious recreates conditions similar to the original conflict, hoping for a different outcome. Without awareness of the underlying desire, the individual feels trapped in patterns that seem irrational and uncontrollable. Humor and creativity are additional channels through which disguised desire slips through. A joke that carries unexpected intensity. A piece of art that feels emotionally charged without clear reason. Freud saw these moments as compromises, safe outlets where forbidden content could surface briefly without overwhelming the self. Laughter and imagination soften the threat, allowing desire to appear in socially acceptable forms before retreating again. The problem with disguise is not that it exists, but that it demands continuous effort. The unconscious must constantly transform and redirect desire to keep it hidden. This effort contributes to mental fatigue. The individual may feel drained without knowing why, caught between impulses that never fully satisfy and defenses that never fully relax. The mind becomes busy managing internal traffic that could be eased through understanding. Freud believed that symptoms often intensify when disguise becomes unstable. When the unconscious can no longer find effective substitutions, desire presses closer to awareness, increasing anxiety. Panic, obsession, or compulsive behavior may emerge not because desire is growing stronger, but because repression is weakening. The mind struggles to maintain the disguise as emotional pressure increases. Recognizing disguised desire changes how inner conflict is approached. Instead of asking, "Why am I doing this?" the question becomes, "What might this be standing in for?" This shift transforms confusion into curiosity. Behavior is no longer judged as irrational. It is interpreted as symbolic. The unconscious stops being an enemy and becomes a translator, speaking in forms shaped by safety rather than clarity. When desire is gradually recognized beneath its disguises, it loses much of its disruptive power. Awareness does not force exposure. It allows gentle decoding. As the original impulse becomes conscious, the mind no longer needs to expend energy hiding it. The disguise can relax, the symptom can soften, and the individual experiences a quiet relief, not because desire has disappeared, but because it no longer needs to wear a mask to exist. Freud did not understand anxiety as a mysterious illness or a random malfunction of the mind. He understood it as a signal, a carefully calibrated warning system designed to protect consciousness from material it is not yet ready to face. Anxiety does not arise because something external is necessarily dangerous, but because something internal is approaching awareness. When repressed desire moves too close to the surface, anxiety appears as a kind of psychological alarm, alerting the mind that a boundary is being tested. This reframing changes everything. Anxiety is no longer meaningless distress. It becomes communication. The mind is saying, quietly but urgently, that something hidden is stirring. The individual often feels anxious for no reason, because the true cause is not present in consciousness. The danger is not in the world, but in the possibility that a forbidden impulse, memory, or feeling might break through the defenses that have kept it contained. Anxiety stands guard at the border between the unconscious and awareness. Freud observed that anxiety often appears disproportionate to the situation that seems to trigger it. A minor social interaction provokes panic. A small decision causes intense dread. From a conscious perspective, the reaction makes no sense. From an unconscious perspective, it is precise. The situation resembles, symbolically or emotionally, an earlier conflict tied to repressed desire. The mind reacts not to the present event, but to the unconscious meaning it carries. Time collapses. Past and present merge without announcement. What makes anxiety so persistent is that it performs its function well. It keeps consciousness away from what feels dangerous by creating discomfort whenever awareness moves too close. The individual learns, often unconsciously, to avoid certain thoughts, situations, or emotional states. This avoidance reduces anxiety temporarily, reinforcing the defense. Yet the underlying desire remains unresolved. The alarm quiets, but the pressure does not disappear. Over time, the range of what feels unsafe can expand, narrowing life gradually and invisibly. Freud distinguished between realistic anxiety, which responds to actual external threat, and neurotic anxiety, which arises from internal conflict. Neurotic anxiety has no clear object. It floats. It attaches itself to whatever is available. This makes it particularly exhausting. The mind cannot solve it because the problem is not where it seems to be. The individual may spend years trying to eliminate anxiety by changing circumstances, unaware that the signal is pointing inward not outward. The body plays a central role in this process. Anxiety is felt physically: tightness in the chest, shallow breathing, racing heart, unease in the stomach. These sensations are not accidents. They mobilize attention and create urgency. Freud understood this somatic intensity as part of the mind's strategy. By activating the body, anxiety makes it difficult to think clearly, ensuring that consciousness turns away from the forbidden material rather than toward it. The alarm works by overwhelming reflection. Importantly, anxiety does not indicate that the repressed desire is dangerous in itself. It indicates that the mind times believes, times it would be dangerous to experience it consciously. Often, what is being protected against is not the desire, but the emotional consequences once associated with it: guilt, shame, fear of abandonment, or loss of love. The unconscious does not update its assessments easily. It reacts as if the original conditions still apply, even when they no longer do. Freud noted that anxiety can intensify when repression weakens. During periods of rest, transition, or reduced distraction, defenses relax slightly. Dreams become vivid. Thoughts wander closer to hidden material. Anxiety may increase unexpectedly, confusing the individual who believes they should feel calmer. In reality, the mind is sensing proximity. The alarm grows louder, not because something is wrong, but because something is coming closer to awareness. This understanding transforms how anxiety is approached. Rather than fighting it directly, Freud suggested listening to it. Anxiety becomes a guide, pointing toward areas of inner life that require gentle exploration. It is not an enemy to be silenced, but a messenger to be understood. When the underlying desire or conflict begins to be recognized consciously, anxiety often decreases on its own, having completed its task. Seen this way, anxiety is not a flaw in the mind's design. It is evidence of intelligence at work, a system trying to maintain balance between expression and protection. The suffering arises not from anxiety itself, but from the prolonged separation between consciousness and what it is guarding against. As that separation narrows through understanding, the alarm no longer needs to sound. The mind begins to rest, not because desire has vanished, but because it is no longer forbidden to exist. When the unconscious presses for expression and consciousness resists, the mind rarely chooses one side completely. Instead, it invents solutions that allow both times, forces to coexist. Freud called these solutions asterisk, compromise formations, asterisk, psychological arrangements that permit partial expression of repressed desire while preserving the defenses that keep awareness feeling safe. Symptoms, habits, personality traits, and repetitive behaviors are not accidents. They are negotiated outcomes in an ongoing internal conflict. A compromise formation is neither pure expression nor pure repression. It is a carefully balanced construction. The desire is allowed to appear, but only in a distorted, limited, or indirect way. At the same time, the defense remains intact, preventing full awareness of the desire's origin. This dual function explains why symptoms often feel both relieving and distressing. They release some inner pressure while creating new discomfort at the surface. The mind accepts this trade-off because it maintains overall stability. Freud observed that many psychological symptoms persist precisely because they times work asterisk. An obsession reduces anxiety by channeling forbidden impulses into repetitive thought. A phobia restricts behavior in a way that keeps unconscious conflict at a distance. A compulsion offers temporary relief by allowing controlled expression of inner tension. These patterns are not random malfunctions. They are structured solutions designed by the unconscious to manage forces that cannot yet be reconciled openly. What makes compromise formations difficult to change is that they feel necessary. Removing the symptom without addressing the underlying conflict often increases anxiety, because the compromise is doing protective work. The individual may consciously wish to eliminate the behavior, yet unconsciously rely on it for emotional regulation. This creates ambivalence, a desire for relief paired with fear of what might emerge if the symptom disappears. The mind resists change not out of stubbornness, but out of caution. Compromise formations also shape character. Freud noted that traits such as excessive conscientiousness, emotional distance, perfectionism, or chronic self-sacrifice often function as stable compromises. They allow certain impulses to remain contained while offering socially acceptable expression. For example, rigid morality may restrain forbidden desires while providing a sense of superiority or control. What appears as personality may in fact be a long-standing solution to an unresolved inner conflict. These compromises are deeply economical. The mind prefers stable arrangements that minimize anxiety, even if they limit flexibility. Over time, the individual may forget that the symptom or trait ever served a purpose. It simply feels like how things are. Freud emphasized that this forgetting is part of the compromise itself. Consciousness is not meant to question the arrangement too closely, because questioning risks destabilization. The solution remains invisible to preserve its effectiveness. Dreams provide a clear illustration of compromise formation. In dreams, desire expresses itself symbolically, while censorship distorts the content to avoid awakening anxiety. The dream allows the unconscious to speak, but only in a language that consciousness cannot fully understand. This is why dreams often feel emotionally powerful, yet confusing. They succeed in expressing something without revealing it directly. The sleeper remains asleep, protected by distortion. Freud believed that psychological suffering increases when compromise formations become too rigid. As life circumstances change, old solutions may no longer fit, yet the mind continues to rely on them. Anxiety grows, symptoms intensify. The unconscious demands renegotiation. What once protected now restricts. At this stage, the symptom becomes louder, not because the mind is failing, but because the compromise is no longer adequate. Understanding compromise formations shifts the focus from elimination to meaning. Instead of asking how to get rid of a symptom, the question becomes asterisk. What is this symptom trying to accomplish? Asterisk. What desire is it expressing? And what danger is it guarding against? This perspective replaces force with curiosity. The mind no longer needs to defend its solutions when it feels understood. As awareness gradually recognizes both sides of the compromise, the desire and the defense, new solutions become possible. The symptom is no longer the only available balance point. Expression can become more direct. Protection can become more flexible. The unconscious relaxes its grip because it no longer needs to negotiate in secret. In this way, Compromise formations reveal the mind's quiet intelligence. They are not signs of disorder, but of adaptation under constraint. The unconscious is constantly working to keep the individual whole, even when that work creates discomfort. By listening to these compromises rather than fighting them, the mind begins to find gentler, more spacious ways to exist, ways that allow desire and safety to coexist without distortion. Freud famously described dreams as times the royal road to the unconscious asterisk, not because dreams are mysterious, but because they occur when the mind's usual defenses are partially relaxed. During waking life, consciousness actively monitors, filters, and senses inner material. At night, this vigilance softens. Attention withdraws from the external world, and the mind enters a state where repression loosens just enough to allow hidden content to move. Dreams emerge precisely in this space, not as random noise, but as structured expressions of unconscious life. Sleep creates a unique psychological condition. The ego, which normally works to maintain order and coherence, reduces its control. Logical sequencing weakens, reality testing fades. In this environment, the unconscious gains an opportunity to express what has been held back during the day. Yet this expression is never direct. If forbidden desires or memories appeared clearly, they would generate anxiety strong enough to wake the dreamer. To prevent this, the mind disguises the material. The dream becomes a compromise, allowing expression without disruption. Freud distinguished between the asterisk manifest content asterisk of a dream, the storyline remembered upon waking, and the asterisk latent content asterisk the hidden psychological meaning beneath it. The manifest dream often feels strange, fragmented, or illogical because it has been transformed. The latent content, by contrast, is emotionally coherent. It contains wishes, fears, conflicts, and unresolved experiences that consciousness cannot yet tolerate. The dream's task is to convert this latent material into a form that can pass through the sleeping mind without triggering alarm. This transformation occurs through what Freud called time's dream work asterisk. The unconscious reshapes its material using processes such as condensation, displacement, and symbolization. Multiple ideas are compressed into a single image. Emotional intensity is shifted from important figures to insignificant ones. Abstract conflicts are expressed through concrete scenes. These distortions are not errors, they are protective strategies. The dream must satisfy the unconscious urge for expression while keeping the sleeper asleep. Because of this, dreams often feel emotionally charged, yet difficult to interpret. A simple image may carry deep significance. A familiar face may represent someone else entirely. Time collapses. Locations merge. Freud emphasized that the unconscious does not think in language or logic, but in associations. Dreams follow this associative logic, linking elements through emotional resonance rather than rational sequence. To the waking mind, this feels confusing. To the unconscious, it is precise. One of Freud's most controversial insights was that dreams are, at their core, wish fulfillments. This does not mean they are pleasant. Many dreams are anxious, frightening, or disturbing. Freud argued that even these dreams fulfill a wish, not necessarily a conscious one, but an unconscious one. Sometimes the wish is to repeat an unresolved situation. Sometimes it is to master a fear symbolically. Sometimes it is simply to express what has been silenced. The discomfort of the dream reflects the strength of repression rather than the absence of desire. Dreams also reveal how little the unconscious respects time. Experiences from childhood appear with the emotional intensity of the present. Old conflicts return in new disguises. The dreamer may feel confused upon waking because the dream does not align with current reality. Freud saw this as evidence that the unconscious retains experiences in their original form. They are not updated or reinterpreted unless they are brought into conscious awareness. Until then, they remain active, influencing emotional life from below. Importantly, Freud did not believe dreams should be interpreted through universal symbols alone. Their meaning is deeply personal. A symbol only makes sense in the context of the dreamer's associations. The unconscious uses the individual's own experiences, memories, and emotional history as its vocabulary. This is why the same image can mean entirely different things to different people. The dream speaks in a private language shaped by lived experience. Dreams also serve a regulatory function. By allowing partial expression of repressed material, they reduce internal pressure. This is why suppressing dreams, ignoring them, or waking abruptly from sleep can increase anxiety. The unconscious seeks expression. When it is repeatedly denied, even symbolic release, tension accumulates. Dreams act as safety valves, maintaining psychological balance through indirect communication. Understanding dreams through Freud's lens changes how sleep itself is experienced. Sleep is no longer a state of mental inactivity, but a different mode of mental life, one where the unconscious is given room to speak. Dreams are not distractions from rest. They are part of how rest is achieved. They allow the mind to process what consciousness could not face during the day, preserving equilibrium through symbol rather than confrontation. In this sense, dreams are not interruptions to calm, but contributors to it. They represent the mind's attempt to heal itself quietly, without waking the dreamer into distress. By listening to dreams rather than dismissing them, Freud suggested, one begins to hear the unconscious speaking in its most natural voice, softly, symbolically, and always with the aim of maintaining balance within the mind. To understand why dreams feel so strange yet so emotionally precise, Freud introduced the concept of asterisk asterisk, dream work asterisk asterisk, the set of unconscious operations that transform hidden psychological material into a form that consciousness can tolerate during sleep. Dream work is not decorative, it is functional. Its purpose is to allow forbidden wishes, memories, and conflicts to appear without breaking the fragile equilibrium that keeps the sleeper asleep. The dream is therefore not a direct message, but a carefully engineered construction, a translation rather than a statement. One of the most powerful mechanisms of dream work is asterisk asterisk condensation, asterisk asterisk. Through condensation, multiple ideas, emotions, or memories are compressed into a single image or event. A person in a dream may represent several people at once. A location may combine elements from different places. An object may carry layers of meaning drawn from different moments in life. Condensation explains why dream images often feel dense and overcharged, as if they carry more significance than their appearance suggests. The unconscious economizes, packing many meanings into one symbol to reduce exposure. Condensation serves both expression and concealment. By merging several psychological elements into one image, the dream allows desire to surface while blurring its origin. Consciousness encounters the image without recognizing the full weight of what it contains. This compression reduces the risk of anxiety. The mind senses importance without knowing why, allowing the dream to continue without interruption. In this way, condensation protects sleep while satisfying unconscious pressure. Another central process is displacement through which emotional intensity is shifted away from its true source and attached to something less threatening. A powerful feeling toward an important figure may be redirected onto a stranger. A major conflict may appear as a trivial inconvenience. Displacement explains why dreams often focus on seemingly insignificant details while ignoring what feels most relevant in waking life. The unconscious relocates danger to safer territory. Displacement is particularly effective because it preserves emotional energy while disguising its origin. The dreamer feels the emotion clearly: fear, desire, excitement, guilt, but misunderstands what it refers to. This misunderstanding is essential. If the emotion were correctly aligned with its true source, anxiety would rise and sleep would be disrupted. Displacement allows feeling without recognition, experience without insight. Symbolization adds another layer of transformation. The unconscious does not communicate in abstract language. It speaks through images, scenes, movements, and sensations. Inner states become external events. Psychological conflict becomes spatial arrangement. Desire becomes journey. Fear becomes pursuit. These symbols are not universal codes but personal constructions shaped by the dreamer's own history, associations, and emotional experiences. What matters is not the symbol itself, but what it connects to internally. Symbolization allows the unconscious to express complex emotional material without naming it. Naming would invite judgment. Images bypass evaluation. The dreamer witnesses rather than analyzes. This passivity is crucial. During sleep, consciousness is not positioned to argue, resist, or reinterpret. It receives. The unconscious takes advantage of this openness, presenting its material in forms that feel natural within the dream's logic. Freud also described secondary revision a process that occurs either during dreaming or upon waking. Here, the mind attempts to impose coherence on the dream, smoothing inconsistencies and creating a narrative that feels more acceptable. This is why dreams sometimes appear more orderly than the underlying dream work would suggest. Secondary revision is the ego's attempt to regain control, organizing the dream into a story that can be remembered without distress. What makes dream work so psychologically sophisticated is its precision. Each distortion serves a function. Nothing in the dream is accidental. Even the most absurd image has a purpose within the economy of expression and defense. The unconscious is not chaotic. It is strategic. It knows how close it can approach awareness without triggering rejection. Dreams reflect this delicate negotiation moment by moment. This understanding changes how dreams are approached. Rather than asking whether a dream is true or false, meaningful or meaningless, Freud invited a different question. Why is the mind presenting this material in this particular form? Asterisk. What is being hidden and what is being allowed through? The distortion itself becomes the clue. Where meaning is blurred, resistance is strongest. Where images feel excessive or emotionally charged, unconscious pressure is greatest. Dream work reveals a mind that is neither random nor reckless. It is careful, it adapts, it protects. While consciousness rests, the unconscious continues its labor, shaping experience so that expression can occur without harm. Dreams are not intrusions into sleep. They are the reason sleep can continue. They allow the mind to speak without waking itself into conflict. Seen this way, dream work is not deception. It is diplomacy. It is the language of a system that must negotiate between truth and safety every night. And by learning to recognize the patterns of condensation, displacement, and symbolization, one begins to hear the unconscious more clearly, not in what it says directly, but in how carefully it chooses to disguise itself. Among all dream phenomena, Freud paid particular attention to recurring dreams, dreams that return again and again, often with only minor variations, carrying a persistent emotional tone that does not fade with repetition. Unlike ordinary dreams, which may process daily residue and then dissolve, recurring dreams signal something unresolved. They appear when the unconscious has attempted expression repeatedly, but has not been adequately received or integrated by consciousness. The repetition is not redundancy, it is insistence. The mind is returning to the same material because it has not yet been allowed to complete its work. Freud understood repetition as one of the unconscious mind's most fundamental tendencies. What has not been symbolically processed does not pass with time. Instead, it circles. A recurring dream often originates in an early emotional experience that was overwhelming, confusing, or forbidden at the moment it occurred. Because the experience could not be fully understood or emotionally digested, it remained suspended in the unconscious, retaining its original intensity. The dream becomes the stage on which this unfinished experience continues to appear. What makes recurring dreams particularly powerful is their emotional consistency. Even when the imagery changes, the feeling remains the same: fear, helplessness, urgency, longing. Freud emphasized that emotion is the key to interpretation. The unconscious is less concerned with narrative accuracy than with emotional truth. The repeated dream is not trying to tell a story. It is trying to restore contact with a feeling that has been cut off from conscious life. Many recurring dreams involve themes of pursuit, falling, being unprepared, being trapped, or returning to the same place. Freud did not interpret these themes literally. He saw them as symbolic expressions of inner states, pressure, loss of control, unresolved dependency, or fear of exposure. The repetition indicates that the unconscious has found a form of expression that successfully bypasses censorship, even if it fails to resolve the conflict itself. The dream continues because it works just well enough to persist. Freud also linked recurring dreams to the concept of fixation. When psychological development is interrupted by conflict, parts of the mind remain tied to earlier stages. These fixations do not mature with the rest of the personality. They remain active, seeking resolution under the conditions in which they were formed. The recurring dream represents an attempt to revisit that moment symbolically, to complete a process that was halted prematurely. Importantly, recurring dreams are not signs of weakness or pathology. They are evidence of psychological perseverance. The unconscious does not abandon material simply because it is difficult. It continues to present it patiently and persistently in forms that consciousness can tolerate. The repetition reflects the mind's refusal to discard unresolved experience. It is an effort to heal through return rather than avoidance. Freud observed that recurring dreams often intensify during periods of transition or vulnerability. Changes in life, structure, rest, illness, emotional openness, or reduced distraction weaken defensive barriers. The unconscious senses opportunity. It brings the unresolved material closer, increasing the frequency or vividness of the dream. The individual may interpret this as regression or disturbance, but from the unconscious perspective, it is progress. Something is finally approaching awareness. What maintains recurring dreams is not the absence of insight, but the absence of emotional integration. One may intellectually understand a dream's theme and still dream it repeatedly. The unconscious is not satisfied with explanation alone. It seeks recognition at the level of feeling. Until the emotional charge connected to the dream is acknowledged and contained consciously, the repetition continues. Understanding without contact does not complete the process. Freud believed that when the underlying conflict begins to be symbolized consciously, not judged, not suppressed, but felt and understood, recurring dreams often soften or disappear. Their task has been completed. The unconscious no longer needs to repeat itself because it has been heard. The repetition ceases not through force, but through reception. Seen this way, recurring dreams are not disturbances of sleep, but invitations. They mark the precise points where the psyche is ready for integration. They reveal where time has stopped internally and where emotional life remains unfinished. By returning night after night, they ask the same quiet question. Asterisk, are you ready to listen now? Asterisk. And when the answer finally becomes yes, not through effort, but through openness, the dream no longer needs to return. Beyond their symbolic meaning and emotional intensity, Freud understood dreams as nightly negotiations, delicate psychological processes through which the mind preserves balance between expression and protection. Every night, as consciousness withdraws and defenses loosen, the unconscious faces a familiar challenge: how to release pressure without destabilizing the system. Dreams are the solution the mind has evolved for this task. They are not accidents of sleep, but carefully calibrated mechanisms designed to maintain inner equilibrium. During waking life, repression performs the heavy labor of keeping certain material out of awareness. This labor is costly. It requires constant vigilance, continuous energy, and sustained inhibition. Sleep offers temporary relief from this effort, but only if the unconscious is allowed some degree of expression. Dreams emerge as compromised spaces where hidden material can surface safely. They relieve pressure just enough to prevent psychological overload, while preserving the defenses that keep consciousness intact. Freud emphasized that this process is ongoing and dynamic. The mind does not resolve its conflicts once and for all. It manages them repeatedly, adjusting expression according to current conditions. A dream that feels intense one night may soften the next, depending on how much pressure has accumulated and how rigid defenses remain. Dreams respond to the internal climate. They are sensitive indicators of the balance or imbalance between repression and expression. This is why periods of emotional stress, often produce vivid or disturbing dreams. When waking life demands increased repression through responsibility, performance, or emotional restraint, unconscious pressure builds. At night, this pressure seeks release. Dreams become more dramatic, more emotionally charged, because more material is pressing for expression. The dream is not causing distress, it is responding to it. It is the psyche's attempt to restore balance when waking defenses have been overextended. Freud also observed that dreams protect sleep itself. If unconscious material were to emerge too clearly, anxiety would wake the dreamer. The dream work, therefore, adjusts continuously, distorting content just enough to prevent disruption. This protective function explains why dreams often feel incomplete or confusing. Clarity would be dangerous. Ambiguity keeps the dream within tolerable limits. Sleep continues. The mind rests while still doing its necessary work. In this sense, dreaming is not opposed to rest. It is one of its conditions. The unconscious uses dreams to process what consciousness cannot manage during the day. By doing so symbolically, it prevents accumulation of unresolved tension. Without dreams, Freud believed, psychological pressure would rise unchecked, leading to increased anxiety, irritability, or symptom formation. Dreams are safety valves, releasing just enough to keep the system stable. There is also an adaptive intelligence in how dreams select their material. Not everything repressed appears at once. The unconscious chooses what is closest to awareness, what is emotionally ripe, what can be expressed without overwhelming the sleeper. This selectivity reflects a deep attunement to the individual's capacity at a given moment. The dream does not aim to reveal everything. It aims to reveal times enough asterisk. Freud saw this nightly negotiation as evidence that the mind is not chaotic, but self-regulating. Even conflict is managed with care. The unconscious does not seek to flood consciousness. It seeks cooperation. Dreams are invitations, not invasions. They present material gradually, symbolically, and repeatedly until it can be received. The pace is slow because safety matters more than speed. Over time, this process shapes emotional resilience. When dreams are allowed, their role remembered, reflected upon, or at least not resisted, the psyche maintains flexibility. When dreams are ignored, suppressed, or interrupted repeatedly, pressure accumulates. The mind loses one of its primary tools for regulation. Rest becomes shallow. Anxiety increases. The system strains to compensate through other means. Understanding dreams as nightly negotiations reframes their presence entirely. They are no longer intrusions into peace, but guardians of it. They allow the unconscious to speak just enough to prevent rupture, and the conscious mind to rest without being overwhelmed. In this quiet exchange, the psyche sustains itself, balancing truth and protection, expression and rest, night after night. In Freud's vision, dreaming is the mind's most patient form of care. It does not demand attention. It does not force insight. It works quietly, symbolically, and persistently, ensuring that what cannot yet be known can still be held. And through this gentle, ongoing negotiation, the psyche remains whole, not because conflict disappears, but because it is managed with remarkable, unseen intelligence. As Freud moved beyond dreams into waking life, He introduced a new way of understanding how the mind maintains balance from moment to moment. At the center of this system stands the **ego***, not as a symbol of pride or confidence, but as a regulatory function tasked with an extraordinarily complex role. The ego must continuously negotiate between the demands of inner desire, the prohibitions of internalized rules, and the constraints of external reality. It does this quietly, constantly, and often invisibly, shaping everyday experience without drawing attention to itself. The ego emerges gradually as the mind encounters reality. In early life, impulses seek immediate satisfaction. Hunger, frustration, pleasure, and attachment demand expression without delay. Reality intervenes. Not everything can be satisfied. Not everything is permitted. The ego develops as the part of the mind that learns how to satisfy impulses in ways that do not lead to danger, rejection, or loss. It does not eliminate desire, it manages it. This management becomes the foundation of psychological functioning. What makes the ego's task so demanding is that it answers to multiple masters at once. From below, unconscious desires push for expression. From above, internalized values and prohibitions impose limits. From outside, reality presents practical consequences. The ego must assess timing, context, and consequence continuously. It decides what can be expressed now, what must be postponed, and what must be disguised entirely. Most of this work occurs outside conscious awareness, giving the impression that behavior simply happens naturally. Freud emphasized that the ego operates according to the *** reality principle ***, rather than the pleasure principle that governs unconscious desire. The reality principle does not deny pleasure, it delays and reshapes it. This delay requires foresight, patience, and restraint. When functioning well, the ego allows the individual to live effectively in the world without being overwhelmed by inner conflict. When strained, it becomes rigid, anxious, or exhausted, struggling to maintain equilibrium under pressure. The ego's success often goes unnoticed. When inner demands are managed smoothly, life feels coherent, decisions feel reasonable, emotions feel proportionate. When the ego is overwhelmed, symptoms appear. Anxiety signals that demands exceed capacity. Irritability suggests reduced tolerance. Confusion indicates competing pressures that cannot be resolved easily. Freud viewed these signs not as failures, but as evidence of the ego's limits. Even the most skilled mediator can become strained when demands intensify. Defense mechanisms arise precisely at these moments of strain. They are not arbitrary habits, but tools the ego uses to protect itself from overload. Repression, denial, rationalization, projection. Each defense alters experience in a specific way to reduce anxiety. The ego deploys these strategies automatically, without conscious planning, prioritizing stability over accuracy. The goal is not truth, but survival within manageable emotional bounds. Importantly, the ego does not seek perfection. It seeks time's workability. It accepts compromise. It tolerates partial satisfaction. It allows some discomfort to avoid greater disruption. This pragmatic orientation explains why many people live with persistent unease rather than dramatic breakdown. The ego continuously adjusts, choosing the least costly option available at any given moment. Psychological health, in this view, is not the absence of conflict, but the capacity to manage it flexibly. The ego's relationship to time is also crucial. Unlike the unconscious, which treats past experience as eternally present, the ego understands sequence. It remembers consequences. It anticipates outcomes. This temporal awareness allows it to learn from experience and adapt behavior. When early conflicts dominate, however, the ego may struggle to distinguish past from present. Emotional reactions feel immediate and disproportionate because old pressures overwhelm current judgment. The ego's mediating function becomes compromised. Freud believed that much psychological suffering arises when the ego is forced to maintain stability under conditions it was never designed to handle alone. Excessive repression, unresolved conflict, or rigid internal rules place unbearable demands on mediation. Symptoms then appear as emergency measures, signals that renegotiation is necessary. The ego is asking for relief, not signaling collapse. Understanding the ego's role transforms how inner struggle is interpreted. Instead of blaming weakness or lack of discipline, attention turns to the difficulty of the task itself. To be human is to mediate continuously between incompatible demands. The ego performs this task tirelessly, often without recognition, and when it falters, it does not fail dramatically. It adapts imperfectly, choosing protection over clarity. Seen through this lens, the ego is not an obstacle to authenticity, but its guardian. It allows desire to exist within reality, and reality to be navigated without denying desire entirely. Its work is subtle, exhausting, and essential. And by recognizing the ego's role, the mind can begin to soften its self-judgment, understanding that stability is not a given, but an ongoing achievement maintained through constant, unseen negotiation. When the ego senses that inner demands exceed what consciousness can tolerate, it does not pause to deliberate. It acts. Defense mechanisms emerge automatically, shaping perception, memory, emotion, and interpretation in ways that reduce psychological threat. Freud emphasized that these defenses are not choices, they are reflexes. They operate beneath awareness, altering experience before the individual has time to recognize what is happening. The mind protects itself first and explains later, if it explains at all. Defense mechanisms exist because the ego's task is impossible without them. To mediate perfectly between desire, morality, and reality would require constant clarity and unlimited emotional capacity. Human consciousness has neither. Defenses provide shortcuts. They simplify inner life by distorting it just enough to keep anxiety within manageable limits. The ego does not aim for accuracy. It aims for stability. When threat appears, defenses deploy immediately, reshaping experience to preserve balance. One of the most fundamental defenses is denial. In denial, the ego refuses to acknowledge aspects of reality or inner experience that feel overwhelming. This refusal is not stubbornness, it is preservation. To recognize certain truths, loss, dependency, vulnerability, forbidden desire, might destabilize the entire system. Denial creates a temporary shelter where the ego can continue functioning while avoiding direct contact with threat. The cost is distance from reality, but the benefit is psychological survival. Asterisk, asterisk. Repression, asterisk, asterisk. The cornerstone of Freud's theory operates even more deeply. It prevents certain thoughts, memories, or impulses from entering awareness at all. Unlike denial, which rejects what is already perceived, repression blocks perception before it forms. The ego removes material from consciousness entirely, sealing it in the unconscious where it can no longer provoke immediate anxiety. This removal is not permanent resolution, it is postponement. The material remains active, shaping experience indirectly. Other defenses are more subtle. Asterisk, asterisk. Rationalization, asterisk, asterisk, provides explanations that feel reasonable while concealing uncomfortable motives. The ego reframes desire as logic, impulse as principle, fear as preference. The individual believes they understand themselves clearly, unaware that understanding has been shaped to protect rather than reveal. Rationalization is particularly effective because it preserves self-image while avoiding emotional exposure. The mind feels coherent even when truth has been adjusted. Asterisk, asterisk. Projection, asterisk, asterisk, externalizes inner conflict. Qualities the ego cannot accept within the self are perceived in others. Anger appears everywhere but within. Desire is seen as intrusive rather than internal. Projection reduces anxiety by relocating threat outside the psyche. The cost is distortion of relationships. The world begins to mirror what the mind cannot face. Freud noted that projection can create persistent interpersonal tension, as inner conflict is experienced as external hostility. More adaptive defenses also exist. Asterisk, asterisk, sublimation, asterisk, asterisk, allows unacceptable impulses to be transformed into socially valued activities, creativity, work, caregiving, discipline. Here, the ego finds a solution that satisfies desire without violating reality or morality. Freud viewed sublimation as a cornerstone of culture itself. It demonstrates that defense mechanisms are not inherently pathological. They can be creative, productive, and stabilizing when flexible and proportional. What determines whether defenses become problematic is not their presence, but their rigidity. When the ego relies too heavily on a narrow set of defenses, psychological flexibility diminishes. Experience becomes predictable but constrained. Emotional range narrows. Anxiety may increase because defenses must work harder to maintain control. The mind spends more energy protecting itself than living freely. Symptoms intensify when defenses no longer fit the complexity of experience. Freud emphasized that defenses are invisible to the person using them. Awareness arrives after the distortion has already occurred. This invisibility is essential to their function. If the ego recognized its own maneuvers fully, the defense would fail. The mind would be confronted with precisely what it is trying to avoid. Defense mechanisms therefore operate silently, shaping reality before it reaches conscious thought. Understanding defenses changes how behavior is interpreted. Instead of asking why someone is irrational, the question becomes what they are protecting themselves from. Every defense implies a perceived danger. Even rigid or destructive patterns once served a protective function. The ego does not invent defenses arbitrarily. It deploys what has worked before, often long after circumstances have changed. As insight develops, defenses do not need to be dismantled forcefully. They soften when they are no longer necessary. When the ego senses that consciousness can tolerate more complexity, it relaxes its grip. Experience becomes clearer, emotions become more nuanced, and behavior becomes less compulsive. The mind does not abandon protection abruptly. It renegotiates it gradually. Seen this way, defense mechanisms reveal the ego's quiet intelligence. They are not signs of weakness, but evidence of a system striving to maintain balance under pressure. The ego protects without asking permission because it must. And by recognizing this protective labor, awareness can begin to approach inner life with less judgment and more patience, allowing the mind to feel safe enough to reveal what it has been guarding for so long. Over time, defense mechanisms do not remain isolated responses to momentary threat. When certain inner conflicts persist, the ego begins to rely on the same protective strategies again and again. Gradually, what began as a response becomes a style. Protection solidifies into habit, and habit settles into character. Freud observed that personality is often the long-term outcome of repeated defensive choices, shaped not only by what the individual expresses, but by what the ego has learned it must consistently guard against. This transformation happens quietly. The individual does not decide to become guarded, controlling, detached, or overly accommodating. These qualities emerge because they work. They reduce anxiety reliably. They prevent contact with painful or forbidden inner material. Over years, the ego stops questioning these strategies and begins to treat them as identity. What once felt like effort now feels natural. The defense disappears into the background, and the person experiences the result as who I am. Freud emphasized that this process explains why personality traits often feel so stable and resistant to change. They are not merely preferences or habits, they are protective structures. To loosen them feels dangerous, because doing so threatens to expose what they were built to contain. A person who appears emotionally distant may be protecting against overwhelming dependency. A person who seems endlessly self-sacrificing may be defending against forbidden anger or desire. The trait is not random, it is purposeful, even when it causes suffering. When defenses harden into character, the ego gains predictability at the cost of flexibility. Life becomes manageable but narrow. Emotional range shrinks to what feels safe. Certain experiences are avoided entirely, not because they are objectively harmful, but because they approach defended territory. The individual may not feel anxious all the time, but there is often a sense of limitation, an unspoken boundary beyond which life does not expand easily. This rigidity often reveals itself in relationships. Interpersonal patterns repeat with striking consistency. Authority figures evoke disproportionate reactions. Intimacy feels either overwhelming or strangely empty. Conflict is avoided or provoked compulsively. Freud understood these patterns as expressions of internal defenses played out in the social world. The ego uses relationships as arenas where its protective strategies can operate continuously, reinforcing familiar roles that keep unconscious conflict at bay. One of the most subtle consequences of defensive character is the loss of emotional curiosity. When defenses dominate, the mind stops asking why it feels what it feels. Emotions are managed rather than explored. Discomfort is resolved quickly through habitual responses. This efficiency feels like strength, but it often masks fragility. The ego becomes dependent on its defenses, requiring them to remain intact to preserve stability. Change, even positive change, can feel threatening because it disrupts the established balance. Freud also noted that defensive character structures often generate secondary problems. What once protected against anxiety may now create loneliness. What once prevented conflict may now suppress vitality. The ego maintains the defense because it still fears what lies beneath, even as the cost of protection increases. This is why individuals may feel trapped by aspects of themselves they consciously dislike but unconsciously rely on. The defense has outlived its original purpose, but the ego has not yet found an alternative. Importantly, Freud did not view defensive character as pathology by default. It represents the mind's best solution under specific historical conditions. Each defense reflects a moment when the psyche chose survival over openness. These choices deserve understanding, not judgment. The problem arises not because the defense exists, but because it has become the only available way of being. Growth requires options. Rigidity removes them. When awareness begins to recognize defensive patterns as protection rather than essence, something shifts. Identity loosens slightly. Traits feel less absolute. The individual may begin to sense that there is more beneath the familiar responses, emotions that were postponed rather than eliminated. This recognition does not dismantle defenses immediately. It creates space. The ego starts to consider that it may not need to protect as aggressively as before. Freud believed that meaningful change occurs not through confrontation, but through gradual integration. As the mind becomes able to tolerate what was once forbidden, defenses soften naturally, character becomes more fluid, emotional range expands without chaos. The ego learns that it can survive with less armor. Seen this way, personality is not a fixed structure, but a living record of what the mind has needed to defend against. To understand character is to understand protection. And as that understanding deepens, the ego can begin to transform identity from a fortress into a flexible boundary, one that protects without imprisoning and allows the self to breathe more freely within its own inner world. When defenses have hardened into character, change does not arrive through force or sudden insight. Freud understood transformation as a slow, delicate process in which awareness gradually alters the conditions that once required protection. The ego does not abandon its defenses simply because they are identified. It relaxes them only when it senses that the danger they were built to contain is no longer overwhelming. This is why psychological change often feels incremental rather than dramatic. A quiet shift in tolerance rather than a decisive breakthrough. At the heart of this transformation is safety. Defenses exist because the mind once concluded that certain emotions, desires, or memories could not be survived consciously. As long as that conclusion remains intact, protection remains necessary. Awareness begins to soften defenses not by arguing with them, but by demonstrating through repeated experience that what was once intolerable can now be felt without collapse. This demonstration happens slowly, often below the level of conscious intention. Freud emphasized that insight alone is insufficient. Understanding a defense intellectually does not dissolve it. The ego must times experience times that letting go does not result in catastrophe. This experience usually occurs in small moments, a feeling allowed to linger without being shut down, a reaction noticed rather than immediately justified, a memory approached gently rather than avoided. Each of these moments weakens the certainty that protection must remain absolute. As defenses soften, the personality begins to regain flexibility. Emotional responses become less predictable, but also less rigid. The individual may feel temporarily uncertain, as familiar reactions no longer operate automatically. This uncertainty can feel unsettling, yet it signals progress. The ego is experimenting with new ways of responding, testing whether the old armor is still required. What once felt like identity begins to feel optional. This stage is often accompanied by a renewed sensitivity. Without heavy defenses in place, emotions may feel more vivid. Joy becomes more present. Sadness feels deeper, but more honest. Anger appears without immediately being redirected or suppressed. Freud did not view this sensitivity as regression. He saw it as recovery, the return of emotional capacities that had been narrowed to maintain safety. The mind is relearning how to feel without being overwhelmed. Importantly, softening defenses does not mean losing protection entirely. The ego does not become passive or exposed. It becomes adaptive. Defenses are still available when needed, but they are no longer the only response. Choice enters where compulsion once ruled. The individual can feel an impulse without immediately acting on it, or recognize discomfort without needing to escape it. This flexibility marks psychological growth more reliably than any single insight. Freud also noted that as defenses relax, earlier emotional material often rises closer to awareness. Memories become clearer. Feelings long muted regain intensity. This resurfacing can feel destabilizing if misunderstood. In reality, it reflects increased capacity. The mind is not being flooded. It is allowing itself to process what was once postponed. The unconscious responds to this openness by reducing pressure. Symptoms soften. Anxiety decreases in frequency or intensity. Relationships often change during this phase. Without rigid defenses structuring interaction, patterns shift. The individual may respond differently to authority, intimacy, or conflict. Old roles lose their grip. This can create temporary tension as familiar dynamics dissolve. Freud understood this not as disruption, but as reorganization. The psyche is renegotiating how it relates both internally and externally without relying on outdated protection. What ultimately replaces rigid defense is not vulnerability without boundary, but integration. Desires once split off are recognized as part of the self. Emotions once feared are felt within limits. Identity becomes less about protection and more about coherence. The ego no longer needs to maintain a fortress because it has learned that the inner world is survivable, even in its complexity. In this sense, softening the armor is not the removal of strength, but its refinement. Strength no longer comes from resistance alone, but from the capacity to remain present. Freud's vision of psychological health was never about eliminating conflict. It was about increasing the mind's ability to tolerate it without distortion. As defenses transform, the mind begins to rest more deeply. Less energy is spent guarding, filtering, and managing. Awareness becomes more open, more fluid, and less exhausted. The ego continues its work, but with less urgency and less strain. And in this quieter mode of functioning, the self feels less like a structure under siege and more like a living system capable of protection when needed and openness when possible, held together not by armor but by understanding. Freud believed that the unconscious is not formed gradually in adulthood, but structured decisively in early life, during periods when the mind is most open and least defended. Childhood experiences do not simply fade into memory. They settle into the unconscious as emotional imprints, shaping perception, expectation, and reaction long before conscious reflection is possible. These early impressions are not stored as stories or facts. They are stored as feelings, tensions, and relational patterns that quietly organize the psyche from within. In childhood, the mind does not yet have the capacity to interpret experience symbolically or rationally. Events are not evaluated, they are absorbed. Pleasure, frustration, fear, and attachment are felt directly, without context or explanation. When experiences are overwhelming or contradictory, the mind cannot integrate them fully. Instead, it records them as unresolved emotional states. These states do not remain confined to the past. They become templates through which later experience is filtered. Freud emphasized that what matters most is not what happened objectively, but how it was experienced subjectively. A moment of perceived abandonment, even if brief, can leave a lasting imprint. A feeling of being misunderstood or unseen can shape lifelong expectations of relationships. The unconscious does not measure intensity by duration or logic. It measures by emotional impact. What overwhelms the child becomes significant, regardless of how small it appears from an adult perspective. These early imprints form before the ego is fully developed. As a result, they are not mediated by judgment or choice. The child does not decide how to respond. The response becomes automatic. Fear may turn into withdrawal. Desire may turn into compliance. Anger may turn inward. These responses are adaptive at the time, allowing the child to maintain attachment and safety. Later, they persist, not because they are still necessary, but because they are familiar and deeply embedded. Freud observed that early relationships play a particularly powerful role in shaping the unconscious. The figures who provide care, authority, and emotional regulation become internalized as representations that continue to influence inner life. The child's experience of closeness, distance, approval, or unpredictability becomes the emotional grammar of future relationships. The unconscious learns what to expect, what to fear, and what to suppress long before conscious memory can form. Because these imprints are formed before language, they often feel mysterious in adulthood. Emotional reactions arise without explanation. Certain situations feel charged without obvious reason. The individual may sense that something is familiar or threatening without being able to articulate why. Freud understood these moments as encounters with early emotional memory, not remembered as events, but reactivated as states of being. The past returns not as recollection, but as feeling. One of the most enduring consequences of childhood imprints is repetition. The unconscious seeks what it knows, even when what it knows is painful. People are drawn to familiar emotional patterns because familiarity feels safer than uncertainty. This is why individuals may recreate dynamics of neglect, control, or inconsistency in adult relationships, even while consciously wishing for something different. The unconscious prioritizes predictability over comfort. Freud stressed that these repetitions are not acts of self-punishment. They are attempts at mastery. The mind returns to early patterns in the hope that this time the outcome will change. The unconscious is trying to resolve what was once overwhelming by revisiting it under new conditions. Without awareness, this effort remains invisible, repeating endlessly without resolution. With awareness, the pattern can begin to loosen. As childhood imprints shape the unconscious, they also shape self-image. The way the child was seen becomes the way the adult sees themselves. Feelings of worth, competence, guilt, or inadequacy often trace back to early emotional environments. These beliefs feel self-evident, as if they reflect objective truth, yet they are deeply subjective products of early experience. The unconscious treats them as facts because they were learned before doubt was possible. Freud did not view these imprints as destiny. He saw them as starting points, powerful, formative, but not immutable. What gives them such influence is their invisibility. When they remain unconscious, they operate without challenge. When they are gradually recognized, felt, and understood, their grip weakens. The mind gains the ability to respond rather than repeat. Understanding childhood imprints reframes inner struggle once more. Emotional intensity is no longer a flaw, but a trace. Sensitivity becomes evidence of depth rather than weakness. Patterns become meaningful rather than arbitrary. The unconscious reveals itself as a record of early adaptation, intelligent, protective, and enduring. And as awareness learns to approach these imprints with patience rather than judgment, the mind begins to experience a subtle but profound relief. The relief of no longer living entirely within the echoes of its earliest moments. As childhood experiences settle into the unconscious, they do not remain abstract impressions. They take shape as internal figures, emotional representations of the people who once held power, provided care, imposed limits, or created uncertainty. Freud believed that these internalized figures become permanent residents of the psyche, continuing to influence thought, feeling, and behavior long after the original relationships have changed or disappeared. The child does not simply remember caregivers. The child times absorbs, times them. In early life, survival depends on attunement to others. The child's nervous system learns what brings closeness and what brings distance. Approval, disapproval, warmth, and withdrawal are not interpreted intellectually. They are felt directly in the body. Over time, these repeated emotional experiences are internalized as expectations. The mind constructs inner versions of these figures, complete with their perceived judgments, demands, and availability. These inner presences become reference points for self-evaluation and emotional regulation. What makes internalized figures so powerful is that they operate without being recognized as memories. They feel like time's reality, asterisk. A critical inner voice does not announce itself as an echo of the past. It presents itself as truth. A persistent fear of disappointment does not feel inherited, it feels immediate. Freud emphasized that the unconscious does not label its contents with dates. Early relationships continue to act within the present moment, shaping reactions as if the original context still exists. These internal figures influence how the ego relates to desire and restraint. An internalized authority may impose strict limits, generating guilt or anxiety when impulses arise. An internalized, unpredictable figure may create vigilance, making relaxation feel unsafe. An internalized absence may foster longing or self-sufficiency at the cost of closeness. The ego negotiates not only with reality and desire, but with these inner presences that carry the emotional weight of early dependence. Freud observed that internalization is not a faithful recording of actual people. It is a subjective construction shaped by the child's emotional needs and fears. A well-intentioned caregiver may be internalized as threatening if the child experienced inconsistency. A distant figure may be internalized as rejecting, even without overt rejection. The unconscious records impact, not intention. What matters is how the experience was lived, not how it was meant. As these internal figures take root, they begin to organize self-image. The way the child felt seen becomes the way the adult sees themselves. Worth, shame, confidence, and doubt are filtered through these inner relationships. The individual may strive endlessly to satisfy an internalized demand or avoid situations that awaken an internalized fear. The ego adapts its strategies accordingly, often without awareness of the origin of these pressures. These inner presences also shape external relationships through a process Freud later described as repetition. The mind seeks environments and people that resonate with familiar internal dynamics. Authority is challenged or idealized. Intimacy is pursued or avoided. The individual is not consciously recreating the past. The unconscious is seeking continuity. Familiarity provides a sense of orientation, even when it reproduces discomfort. The known feels safer than the unknown. Over time, conflict can arise between internalized figures. One inner voice demands compliance, another longs for expression. The ego is caught between them, mediating tensions that originated long ago. This internal conflict often manifests as indecision, self-criticism, or emotional fatigue. The individual may feel divided without understanding why. Freud saw this division as evidence of layered internal relationships coexisting without integration. Importantly, internalized figures are not fixed. They can change as awareness grows. When the individual recognizes that an inner voice reflects an earlier relationship rather than present reality, its authority begins to soften. The ego gains room to reassess. What once felt absolute becomes contextual. This shift does not erase the internal figure. It places it within a broader understanding. The mind learns that it can listen without obeying automatically. Freud believed that integration involves transforming these internal relationships rather than eliminating them. The goal is not to silence the inner voices, but to renegotiate their roles. The ego becomes less dominated by inherited judgments and more responsive to present conditions. Emotional responses gain flexibility. Self-evaluation becomes less harsh. The unconscious releases some of its pressure because its messages are no longer ignored or misattributed. Understanding internalized figures reframes inner dialogue. Self-criticism becomes a trace of early adaptation. Fear becomes a memory of dependence. Longing becomes an echo of attachment. None of these need to be rejected. They need to be recognized as parts of a history that still lives within the psyche. And as awareness learns to relate to these inner figures with curiosity rather than submission, the mind begins to experience a quieter, steadier sense of agency, grounded not in denial of the past, but in a gentler relationship with it. As internalized figures take their place within the psyche, another powerful dynamic begins to shape unconscious life: fixation. Freud used this term to describe the mind's tendency to remain psychologically attached to certain early emotional configurations, especially those formed during moments of intense need, conflict, or frustration. These fixations do not exist as memories the person can recall at will. They exist as gravitational centers within the unconscious, pulling attention, desire, and behavior back toward familiar emotional terrain, even when that terrain is painful or limiting. Fixation forms when psychological development is interrupted. In childhood, each stage of emotional growth requires a degree of satisfaction and resolution. When needs are consistently unmet, overly punished, or unpredictably responded to, the mind cannot move forward smoothly. Instead, part of the psyche remains anchored at that stage, waiting for a resolution that never arrived. The rest of the personality continues to develop, but the fixation persists beneath the surface, quietly shaping reactions long after the original conditions have passed. What makes fixation so influential is that it operates outside of time. The unconscious does not recognize that the original situation has ended. The emotional state remains active, ready to be triggered by situations that resemble the past, even loosely. A tone of voice, a pattern of attention, a moment of uncertainty can awaken an entire emotional constellation formed decades earlier. The individual experiences the reaction as immediate and present, unaware that it belongs to an earlier chapter of life. Freud observed that fixation often expresses itself through repetition. People find themselves drawn to the same kinds of relationships, conflicts, and disappointments, even when they consciously wish to avoid them. This repetition is not a failure of learning. It is an attempt at completion. The unconscious returns to familiar emotional scenarios in the hope that this time the outcome will be different. It seeks mastery over what was once overwhelming by recreating it under new circumstances. This repetition can be subtle or dramatic. It may appear as choosing similar partners, responding to authority in the same way, or reenacting patterns of dependence, rejection, or control. The individual may feel confused by their own behavior, sensing that it contradicts conscious intention. Freud emphasized that repetition is not driven by logic, but by emotional memory. The unconscious is less interested in avoiding pain than in resolving unfinished experience. One of the most paradoxical aspects of fixation is that familiarity feels safer than uncertainty, even when familiarity is painful. The mind prefers known suffering to unknown possibility. This preference is not masochism, it is orientation. The unconscious knows how to survive within familiar emotional landscapes. New patterns require new forms of regulation, which feel risky. Fixation provides predictability, allowing the ego to anticipate outcomes, even if those outcomes are disappointing. Freud also noted that fixation can limit emotional range. When the psyche remains tied to early configurations, later experiences are filtered through outdated expectations. The individual may overreact to minor frustrations or underreact to genuine intimacy. Emotional responses feel disproportionate because they are driven by unresolved past needs rather than present reality. The ego struggles to mediate because it is negotiating with forces that belong to different developmental moments. Importantly, fixation is not a static condition. It intensifies under stress and softens when the individual feels safe. During periods of vulnerability, rest, or emotional openness, fixated material rises closer to awareness. Anxiety, dreams, or strong emotional reactions may increase, signaling that the unconscious is pressing for recognition. This resurgence is often misunderstood as regression. Freud saw it as opportunity, a sign that the psyche is ready to revisit what was once unbearable. Understanding fixation changes the meaning of repetition. Instead of asking why one keeps making the same mistakes, the question becomes what remains unresolved beneath them. Repetition is not stubbornness. It is persistence. The unconscious continues to return because it has not yet been met with understanding. Each reenactment is an attempt to bring old emotional truth into the present, where it might finally be processed. As awareness grows, fixation begins to loosen. This does not happen through force or avoidance, but through recognition. When the individual can feel the old emotional state without being overwhelmed, the unconscious no longer needs to recreate it externally. The repetition loses its urgency. The mind discovers that the past can be held internally without being replayed endlessly in the present. Freud believed that freedom emerges not when repetition disappears completely, but when it is no longer compulsory. Choice replaces compulsion. The individual can recognize familiar patterns without being drawn into them automatically. Emotional life gains flexibility. The psyche is no longer bound to return to the same places simply because they are known. In this way, fixation reveals both the endurance and the hope of the unconscious. It shows how deeply early experience shapes inner life and how patiently the mind seeks resolution. By understanding why the psyche returns again and again to the same emotional ground, awareness can begin to offer what was missing the first time: presence, recognition, and the possibility of moving forward without abandoning what was once left unfinished. When fixation and repetition have shaped emotional life for years, change does not occur by erasing the past, but by altering the way the past is held within the present. Freud understood this process not as forgetting, but as time's rewriting, time's a gradual transformation of the inner script that governs expectation, reaction, and meaning. Early imprints do not vanish. They lose their authority when they are finally experienced with awareness rather than reenacted through compulsion. The unconscious repeats because it seeks completion, not because it seeks suffering. What was once overwhelming could not be processed at the time it occurred. The psyche stored it in fragments, sensations, emotions, relational patterns, waiting for conditions that would allow integration. Awareness provides those conditions. When the mind can remain present with an old emotional state without becoming flooded, the imprint begins to change its form. It no longer needs to act itself out externally. This transformation requires a different relationship to memory. Early imprints are not accessed, like stories with a beginning and an end. They appear as moods, bodily sensations, sudden emotional shifts, or familiar relational impulses. Freud emphasized that working through these imprints involves tolerating their emotional reality without immediately explaining, judging, or suppressing them. The ego learns to stay with what was once escaped. This staying is what rewrites the script. As awareness meets these imprints, the unconscious responds. The emotional charge begins to soften. What once felt absolute becomes contextual. The mind realizes that the feeling belongs to a different time, even if it still echoes in the present. This recognition does not diminish the importance of the experience. It places it within a broader timeline. The past becomes something that happened, rather than something that is still happening. One of the most profound shifts occurs in how the individual relates to expectation. Early imprints often create rigid predictions. Closeness will end in loss. Authority will bring punishment. Desire will lead to shame. These expectations feel like truths because they were learned before doubt was possible. As awareness revisits the emotional source of these beliefs, they lose their inevitability. The ego gains the freedom to respond rather than anticipate. Experience becomes more open, less predetermined. Freud observed that this process unfolds slowly because the psyche moves at the speed of safety. The unconscious will not release its grip until it senses that integration will not result in collapse. This is why patience is essential. Each small moment of tolerating old emotion without defense signals to the unconscious that conditions have changed. Over time, pressure decreases, symptoms soften, repetition loses its urgency. The mind no longer needs to insist. As early imprints are rewritten, identity begins to shift subtly. Traits that once felt fixed start to loosen. The individual may discover new emotional capacities, the ability to feel closeness without panic, assertiveness without guilt, rest without vigilance. These changes often feel surprisingly quiet. There is no dramatic breakthrough, only a growing sense of ease where tension once lived. The ego does less work because it no longer needs to protect against the same threats. Relationships also change as the inner script evolves. The unconscious stops projecting old dynamics onto new people. Familiar roles lose their grip. The individual may respond differently to intimacy, conflict, or authority, not because of effort, but because the old emotional reflexes no longer activate automatically. What once felt magnetic or threatening begins to feel neutral. Choice replaces compulsion. Importantly, rewriting the inner script does not mean rejecting the past. Freud saw integration as an act of inclusion rather than correction. The experiences that shaped the unconscious are acknowledged as part of the self's history. They are no longer exiled. This inclusion reduces inner division. The mind feels more whole because fewer parts are being held apart. As the unconscious releases its need to repeat, energy becomes available for presence. Attention is no longer drawn backward constantly. Emotional life becomes less reactive, more responsive. The individual experiences a quiet confidence, not the confidence of certainty, but the confidence of capacity. The mind knows it can feel without being overwhelmed. In Freud's vision, healing is not the removal of early imprints, but their transformation. What once demanded repetition becomes memory. What once required defense becomes experience. The unconscious no longer needs to insist because it has finally been heard. And in that listening, the inner script begins to tell a different story. One written not by survival alone, but by understanding, patience, and the gradual return of choice to the center of inner life. As early imprints, fixations, and internalized figures continue to operate beneath awareness, their combined pressure often finds its most visible expression in anxiety. Freud did not see anxiety as an isolated symptom or a malfunction of the nervous system. He understood it as the emotional signal of an unresolved inner conflict, a state in which opposing forces within the psyche remain active without reconciliation. Anxiety emerges not because the mind is weak, but because it is holding incompatible demands at the same time. At the unconscious level, desire presses for expression, while prohibition presses for restraint. The ego stands between them, attempting to maintain equilibrium. When this balance becomes unstable, anxiety appears as the felt experience of that instability. It is not a message from the outside world, but from within. The mind senses that something forbidden is nearing awareness, and anxiety arises to prevent that crossing. In this way, anxiety functions as a psychological border guard, protecting consciousness from material it believes would be overwhelming. What makes anxiety so unsettling is its lack of a clear object. Unlike fear, which is directed towards something identifiable, anxiety feels diffuse and pervasive. The individual may search for an external cause, attempting to explain the discomfort through circumstance or threat. Freud argued that this search often fails because the true source lies elsewhere. Anxiety is not responding to danger in the present. It is responding to pressure from the past that has not been resolved. This pressure builds gradually. Repressed desires accumulate energy over time, seeking some form of release. As defenses weaken through fatigue, stress, rest, or emotional openness, the distance between the unconscious and awareness narrows. Anxiety increases not because something new has appeared, but because something old is moving closer. The ego senses this movement and reacts, tightening defenses in an attempt to restore distance. Anxiety becomes the felt experience of this tightening. Freud emphasized that anxiety is inseparable from the body. The unconscious speaks through physiological channels because language belongs to consciousness. Tightness in the chest, shallow breathing, restlessness, and unease are not secondary effects. They are the medium through which the signal is delivered. By activating the body, anxiety disrupts reflection and encourages avoidance. The mind turns away from inner exploration because the physical sensation demands immediate attention. This redirection is precisely what the defense is designed to achieve. Over time, chronic anxiety can emerge when inner conflict remains unresolved. The ego expends continuous energy maintaining repression, leaving fewer resources for adaptation and rest. The individual may feel constantly on edge without knowing why. Life becomes organized around avoiding discomfort rather than pursuing meaning. Freud saw this as evidence not of excessive sensitivity, but of excessive internal pressure. The mind is working too hard to keep something out of awareness. Anxiety also narrows perception. When the nervous system is activated, attention becomes selective. The mind scans for threat, often misinterpreting neutral stimuli as dangerous. This hypervigilance reinforces the belief that anxiety is caused by the environment rather than by inner conflict. the cycle deepens. External avoidance increases, while internal tension remains untouched. The unconscious continues to press, unheard. Freud noted that anxiety often intensifies during moments of quiet. When distraction fades, defenses relax slightly, thoughts wander, dreams become vivid. Emotional material edges closer to awareness. The individual may feel anxious precisely when nothing is happening externally. This paradox confuses many people. From a psychoanalytic perspective, it makes sense. Silence removes external anchors, allowing unconscious material to rise. Anxiety responds by filling the space, preventing deeper contact. Importantly, Freud did not view anxiety as something to be eliminated directly. He believed that reducing anxiety without addressing its source merely strengthens repression. The symptom may diminish temporarily, but the conflict remains. Anxiety returns in another form. True relief arises when the unconscious tension that generates the signal begins to resolve not through force, but through gradual awareness and integration. As unconscious conflict becomes more conscious, anxiety often changes its quality. It becomes less diffuse, more specific. The individual may begin to recognize the emotions, desires, or fears that were previously hidden. This recognition can feel uncomfortable at first, but it reduces the need for the alarm. The ego no longer has to guard as aggressively. Anxiety softens because its task is being completed. In this sense, anxiety is not the enemy of calm, but its precursor. It signals where attention is needed. It marks the boundaries of what has been held apart for too long. Freud's insight was that anxiety, when understood rather than resisted, becomes a guide. It points toward the silent conflicts shaping emotional life and invites a deeper form of resolution, one in which the mind no longer needs to protect itself so relentlessly and can begin to rest within its own complexity. Alongside anxiety born from forbidden desire, Freud identified another quieter but equally powerful form of inner tension: guilt that arises without a clear cause. This guilt does not depend on actions taken or rules broken. It exists even when the individual has done nothing objectively wrong. Freud understood this phenomenon as moral anxiety, a state produced not by external judgment, but by internalized authority operating within the unconscious. The mind feels accused without knowing the charge. This kind of guilt originates early, at the moment when external authority becomes internal voice. The child learns not only what is allowed, but what must not even be times wanted asterisk. Over time, prohibitions are absorbed so deeply that they no longer require an external enforcer. The unconscious begins to monitor desire itself. Certain impulses are labeled unacceptable before they reach awareness. Guilt appears as the emotional marker of this boundary, a warning that something within is approaching forbidden territory. What makes unconscious guilt so destabilizing is its vagueness. Unlike realistic guilt, which follows a recognizable action, moral anxiety floats. It attaches itself to thoughts, moods, or even moments of rest. The individual may feel undeserving of pleasure, uneasy during calm, or compelled to justify existence through productivity or sacrifice. Freud saw these patterns as evidence of an inner authority that has become detached from present reality, continuing to operate according to earlier conditions. This internal authority does not negotiate. It judges silently and continuously. The ego, sensing this pressure, attempts to comply by restricting desire, increasing self-control, or engaging in self-punishment. Perfectionism, excessive responsibility, and chronic self-criticism often emerge as efforts to appease this internal voice. The individual believes they are striving for virtue, while unconsciously attempting to relieve guilt whose origin remains hidden. Freud emphasized that unconscious guilt often intensifies when desire is closest to expression. Moments of joy, intimacy, or freedom may trigger discomfort rather than relief. The mind reacts as if pleasure itself were dangerous. Anxiety and guilt combine, creating a subtle but persistent unease that undermines satisfaction. The individual may abandon opportunities for happiness without understanding why, convinced that restraint is somehow necessary for safety. Because unconscious guilt lacks a clear object, the mind often seeks one. The individual may replay past actions, searching for mistakes to explain the feeling. Minor errors are magnified. Neutral events are interpreted as failures. This retroactive search creates a sense of moral coherence, a story that explains the discomfort. Freud understood this as a secondary defense. The mind prefers a false explanation to uncertainty. Having a reason, even an inaccurate one, feels safer than having none. This process can lead to cycles of self-punishment. The individual may unconsciously sabotage success, provoke criticism, or remain in situations that reinforce feelings of inadequacy. These outcomes provide external confirmation for an internal judgment that already existed. The unconscious guilt is satisfied temporarily because it has found expression. The price is suffering that feels deserved, even when it is not understood. Freud noted that unconscious guilt is often mistaken for conscience. While conscience can guide behavior flexibly, unconscious guilt is rigid and relentless. It does not respond to context or growth. It does not update. It continues to enforce standards learned in early emotional environments, long after those standards have lost relevance. The ego struggles to mediate because the authority feels absolute. Questioning it feels dangerous, as if morality itself were at risk. As awareness develops, unconscious guilt begins to change form. The individual may start to notice patterns, discomfort following pleasure, self-criticism without cause, restlessness during calm. These observations weaken the authority's invisibility. Guilt becomes something that times happens asterisk, rather than something that times is asterisk. The ego gains distance. It can begin to ask, not, "What did I do wrong?" but "Why does this feeling appear now?" This shift does not eliminate guilt immediately. It relocates it. The feeling moves from absolute truth to psychological signal. The unconscious authority loses some of its power because it is no longer mistaken for reality itself. The ego can begin to negotiate rather than submit automatically. Desire becomes less threatening because it is no longer equated with wrongdoing. Freud believed that true relief from moral anxiety arises when the internalized authority is integrated rather than obeyed blindly. Its concerns are understood as historical, shaped by early dependence and fear of loss. The individual can retain values without inheriting punishment. Guilt softens because it is no longer needed to enforce safety. The unconscious releases pressure as it senses that its warnings have been heard. In this way, guilt without a crime reveals itself not as a moral truth, but as a trace of early protection, It is the echo of a time when survival depended on compliance. By recognizing this, the mind begins to disentangle ethics from anxiety. Responsibility becomes conscious choice rather than unconscious burden. And as this separation takes place, the psyche experiences a quiet but profound relief. The relief of no longer being judged by a court that exists only in memory. When unconscious guilt and unresolved desire continue to operate without integration, the psyche often develops a final, deeply internalized strategy for maintaining order: self-punishment. Freud observed that when the ego cannot safely express desire and cannot fully silence the internal authority that condemns it, the mind resolves the conflict by directing aggression inward. What cannot be acted out is acted times upon times the self. Suffering becomes a substitute for resolution, offering the unconscious a sense of balance at a significant emotional cost. This inward turn is rarely dramatic or obvious. It often appears as subtle self-restriction rather than overt harm. Opportunities are declined. Pleasure is postponed indefinitely. Rest feels undeserved. The individual may hold themselves to impossible standards, believing that constant effort is necessary to justify existence. Freud understood these patterns not as moral strength, but as compromise solutions, ways the ego attempts to appease unconscious guilt without confronting its source directly. At the core of self-punishment lies an internal surveillance system. The mind watches itself continuously, evaluating thoughts, intentions, and emotional states. This surveillance does not sleep. It notices desire before it reaches awareness and responds immediately with tension, criticism, or restraint. The individual may experience this as an inner voice or simply as a persistent sense of being observed. Freud emphasized that this internal observer is not neutral. It is shaped by early authority and infused with emotional weight. This inner monitoring creates chronic strain. The ego must remain alert at all times, preventing unacceptable impulses from emerging. Emotional spontaneity becomes risky. Even moments of quiet can provoke discomfort, as the mind anticipates judgment without knowing what it has done wrong. Self-punishment often intensifies during periods of rest or success, precisely when defenses relax and desire comes closer to the surface. The mind responds by restoring control through discomfort. Freud noted that self-punishment often disguises itself as responsibility or humility. The individual may believe they are simply being realistic, disciplined, or morally careful. In reality, these behaviors function to maintain a sense of safety by keeping unconscious conflict contained. Suffering becomes proof of virtue. Deprivation becomes reassurance. The mind equates restraint with protection, unaware that it is enforcing rules that no longer correspond to present danger. This mechanism also explains why some individuals feel uneasy when things go well. Success, pleasure, or intimacy reduce external pressure, allowing inner life to become more visible. The unconscious responds by generating discomfort to restore balance. Freud observed that people may unconsciously sabotage positive experiences because calm feels unsafe. The mind prefers familiar tension to unfamiliar ease. Self-punishment restores the known emotional climate. Importantly, Freud did not see self-punishment as evidence of a desire to suffer. He saw it as evidence of unresolved aggression. When anger or protest could not be directed outward toward authority, caregivers, or circumstances, it was redirected inward. The self became both the judge and the accused. This internal split allows aggression to be expressed while preserving external attachment and moral order. The price is inner peace. Over time, this dynamic can lead to emotional exhaustion. Constant self-monitoring drains psychological resources. The individual may feel tired without knowing why, burdened by an invisible weight. Freud understood this fatigue as the cost of continuous repression combined with internal punishment. The mind is working against itself, maintaining order through effort rather than integration. As awareness develops, self-punishment begins to reveal its purpose. Patterns become noticeable: discomfort following pleasure, harsh self-judgment without clear cause, relief after failure. These observations weaken the absolute authority of the internal judge. The ego gains the ability to step back and recognize that suffering is being used as a regulatory tool rather than a moral necessity. This recognition does not immediately dissolve self-punishment. It creates distance. The individual may begin to question whether discomfort truly keeps them safe, or whether it is enforcing outdated rules. Freud believed that when the ego can tolerate desire and anger consciously, self-punishment loses its function. The unconscious no longer needs suffering to maintain balance. Gradually, the internal surveillance relaxes. The mind becomes less vigilant, less reactive. Desire no longer triggers immediate correction. Pleasure becomes less threatening. The self is no longer required to pay for its impulses through discomfort. This shift is subtle but profound. Energy previously spent on self-control becomes available for presence and engagement. In Freud's framework, freedom does not come from eliminating inner conflict, but from ending the need to punish oneself for having it. When aggression, desire, and guilt are recognized as parts of the psyche rather than crimes to be corrected, the mind can stop turning against itself. And in that cessation, a deep relief emerges, the relief of no longer being both prisoner and guard within one's own inner world. When anxiety, guilt, and self-punishment have shaped inner life for long enough, the mind begins to exhaust its own warning systems. Freud understood that the psyche does not seek endless vigilance, it seeks resolution. Anxiety exists because something is being kept apart. When that separation starts to narrow not through force, but through recognition, the alarm no longer needs to sound as loudly. Integration becomes possible, and with it, a different quality of calm begins to emerge. Integration does not mean that unconscious conflict disappears. It means that conflict is no longer managed exclusively through avoidance, punishment, or constant surveillance. The ego begins to tolerate the presence of previously forbidden material desires, emotions, memories, without immediately converting them into symptoms. This tolerance is the turning point. The unconscious senses that it no longer needs to shout in order to be noticed. Pressure decreases because communication has begun. Freud emphasized that anxiety weakens when the ego stops interpreting inner experience as threat. Desire no longer automatically implies danger. Guilt no longer automatically implies wrongdoing. Emotion becomes information rather than accusation. This shift changes the function of anxiety itself. Instead of serving as a barrier, it becomes a signal that can be observed without panic. The mind gains space to reflect rather than react. As integration unfolds, bodily anxiety also changes. The nervous system no longer needs to mobilize constantly. The chest softens, breathing deepens, restlessness decreases. These physiological shifts are not the result of deliberate relaxation techniques, but of reduced inner opposition. When the mind stops fighting itself, the body follows. Freud saw this alignment between psyche and soma as evidence that psychological integration has tangible effects on physical experience. One of the most noticeable changes during integration is the reduction of urgency. Thoughts slow, emotional reactions feel less absolute. The individual no longer feels compelled to resolve discomfort immediately. This patience reflects increased capacity. The ego has learned that it can remain present with internal complexity without collapsing. Anxiety loses its justification because the danger it was guarding against is no longer overwhelming. Integration also alters self-perception. The individual stops experiencing themselves as someone who must be controlled or corrected. Inner life becomes less adversarial. Desire and restraint are no longer enemies locked in permanent conflict. They become elements of a single system, capable of dialogue. Freud believed that this internal cooperation marks psychological maturity more clearly than the absence of symptoms ever could. Importantly, integration does not eliminate moral awareness. Values remain, responsibility remains. What changes is tone. Inner authority becomes less punitive and more guiding. Guilt transforms into discernment. Anxiety transforms into sensitivity rather than alarm. The ego no longer needs to enforce order through suffering. It can rely on understanding instead. As unconscious material becomes more accessible, symptoms often lose their function. Compulsions soften, self-punishment relaxes, emotional extremes moderate. The unconscious no longer needs to encode its messages in distress because it has found a path into awareness. Freud saw this as the natural outcome of being heard. When communication replaces repression, tension diminishes organically. This process unfolds gradually because the psyche values safety above speed. Each moment of tolerating inner experience without defense reinforces trust. The unconscious tests, withdraws, returns, and tests again. Over time, it learns that awareness can hold what was once dangerous. The alarm system recalibrates. Anxiety becomes quieter, less frequent, and less commanding. In this quieter state, the mind experiences a new kind of rest, not the fragile rest that depends on avoidance, but a deeper rest rooted in coherence. Inner life no longer requires constant monitoring. Energy once consumed by conflict becomes available for attention, creativity, and connection. Freud believed that this release of psychic energy is one of the clearest signs of integration at work. Ultimately, integration replaces alarm because it answers the question anxiety was asking all along, asterisk, can this be allowed to exist without destroying me? Asterisk. When the answer becomes yes, slowly, cautiously, but sincerely, the psyche no longer needs to protect itself through fear. The mind settles into a calmer rhythm, not because conflict has vanished, but because it is no longer denied. And in that acceptance, anxiety completes its task and gently steps aside. Even when dreams are forgotten and inner conflicts feel distant, the unconscious remains active, shaping the smallest details of daily life. Freud emphasized that the unconscious does not confine itself to symptoms or sleep. It participates continuously in ordinary perception, decision-making, and behavior. What feels spontaneous, accidental, or instinctive often reflects hidden processes operating quietly beneath awareness. The mind is never neutral. It is always interpreting, selecting, and responding according to patterns laid down long before the present moment. In everyday situations, the unconscious reveals itself through what Freud called time's parapraxis, time's slips of the tongue, forgotten names, misplaced objects, and seemingly trivial mistakes. These moments are often dismissed as accidents, yet Freud argued that they follow emotional logic rather than chance. A word spoken incorrectly may express a thought that consciousness is avoiding. A name forgotten may carry unresolved feeling. The unconscious finds small openings in routine where it can express itself without confrontation. Attention itself is guided by unconscious preference. What stands out in a room, what irritates, what attracts, what is ignored, these selections are not random. The mind filters reality based on emotional relevance shaped by past experience. Two people can encounter the same situation and notice entirely different details because their unconscious priorities differ. Freud believed that perception is already interpretation, guided by what the unconscious deems significant or threatening. Decision-making is similarly influenced. Choices often feel rational on the surface, supported by reasons that make sense consciously. Beneath those reasons, however, lie emotional currents that tip the balance. A job accepted or declined, a relationship pursued or avoided, a risk taken or postponed. Each reflects an unconscious evaluation of safety, desire, and familiarity. The ego presents a narrative of logic, while the unconscious supplies the motivation. Freud noted that habits are among the clearest expressions of unconscious life. Repeated behaviors provide stability, reducing the need for constant decision-making. Yet habits also preserve emotional patterns. A tendency to withdraw, to overwork, to please, or to control often functions as a compromise between desire and anxiety. The individual experiences the habit as preference, unaware that it serves a protective function shaped by earlier experience. Emotional reactions in daily life frequently exceed the immediate situation. A minor criticism feels devastating. A small success feels disproportionately relieving. These intensities signal unconscious resonance. The present moment has touched an older emotional memory, activating feelings that belong to another time. Freud emphasized that the unconscious does not announce this connection. It simply delivers the emotion, leaving consciousness to make sense of it afterward. Social interactions are particularly rich in unconscious exchange. Tone, posture, pauses, and subtle expressions carry emotional information that bypasses conscious analysis. The unconscious reads these signals instantly, responding before words are processed. Attraction, discomfort, trust, and suspicion often arise without clear explanation because they are based on emotional pattern recognition rather than rational assessment. The mind is constantly comparing the present to its stored relational history. Freud also observed that resistance appears in everyday avoidance, topics that provoke discomfort, tasks that are postponed repeatedly, conversations that never quite begin. These are not simply matters of motivation. They often protect against unconscious material that might surface if attention was sustained. Avoidance keeps certain emotional doors closed. The individual experiences relief, unaware of what has been avoided. Even creativity draws heavily on unconscious life. Ideas emerge fully formed, solutions appear unexpectedly, insights arrive without deliberate effort. Freud saw these moments not as miracles, but as the results of unconscious processing. The mind continues to work below awareness, combining memory, desire, and association until something coherent surfaces. Consciousness receives the result without witnessing the process. What makes the unconscious so influential in daily life is its invisibility. Because its operations are hidden, their outcomes feel natural and unquestionable. The individual experiences themselves as choosing freely, reacting appropriately, and perceiving objectively. Freud challenged this comfort. He suggested that freedom increases not when unconscious influence disappears, but when it becomes recognized. Awareness creates room for reflection where compulsion once ruled. Recognizing the unconscious in everyday life does not require constant analysis. It requires curiosity. When reactions feel strong, when patterns repeat, when avoidance persists, these moments offer quiet invitations to look beneath the surface. The unconscious is not interrupting life. It is participating in it continuously. By understanding how hidden processes shape ordinary moments, the mind begins to feel less confused by itself. Reactions become signals rather than flaws. Habits become meaningful rather than arbitrary. Daily life reveals itself as the most active stage of unconscious expression. Not dramatic, but constant, shaping experience gently and relentlessly from within. In the flow of ordinary life, the unconscious rarely announces itself with drama. It prefers subtlety. Freud paid close attention to moments that most people dismiss as trivial: a word spoken incorrectly, a name forgotten at the wrong time, an object misplaced repeatedly, an appointment accidentally missed. These events appear insignificant precisely because they are small. Yet Freud argued that their smallness is what allows them to pass beneath conscious defense. The unconscious chooses modest openings where it can express itself without provoking alarm. A slip of the tongue is not simply a mechanical error. It is a collision between intention and impulse. Consciousness aims to say one thing. The unconscious inserts another. The resulting word often reveals a hidden association, desire, or conflict that the speaker did not intend to expose. Freud emphasized that these slips follow emotional logic, not randomness. They occur where inattention is already present, where something unspoken is pressing for recognition. Forgetting operates in a similar way. Names, tasks, or obligations are not forgotten uniformly. Certain things are forgotten repeatedly, while others remain easily accessible. Freud noted that forgetting often protects against discomfort. A name connected to unresolved feeling becomes difficult to retrieve. A task associated with anxiety is postponed until it fades from awareness. The mind does not forget because it is weak, but because remembering would bring something unwanted closer to consciousness. Misplacing objects offers another window into unconscious intention. Items connected to emotional significance, gifts, documents, reminders, tend to disappear at moments of inner conflict. The individual searches with frustration, unaware that the act of misplacing has already served a function. The object has been removed from awareness temporarily, relieving pressure. Freud argued that the mind often chooses action over thought when thought feels risky. These small accidents feel innocent because they do not challenge self-image. It is easier to laugh at a slip or blame distraction for forgetting than to ask what the mind might be avoiding. The ego preserves its sense of coherence by labeling these events as chance, yet the pattern often repeats. Similar mistakes cluster around similar emotional themes. Over time, the repetition itself becomes the clue. Freud emphasized that these phenomena are not signs of carelessness. They are signs of conflict. Where inner life is aligned, behavior flows smoothly. Where there is tension, small disruptions appear. The unconscious uses these disruptions as safety valves, releasing pressure without requiring direct confrontation. The individual remains largely unaware, and daily life continues uninterrupted. What makes these moments especially revealing is their timing. Slips and forgettings often occur precisely when attention turns towards sensitive topics. A conversation approaches intimacy, and a word falters. Responsibility increases, and an appointment is missed. Pleasure becomes possible, and a mistake intervenes. The unconscious acts at the threshold, interrupting movement toward areas it considers unsafe. Freud also noted that humor frequently accompanies these incidents. Laughter diffuses tension, allowing the moment to pass without scrutiny. Humor is itself a compromise formation, a way to acknowledge something indirectly while avoiding seriousness. The mind smiles and moves on, relieved that nothing more has been asked of it. The unconscious has spoken briefly and retreated. Importantly, not every slip or mistake carries deep meaning. Freud cautioned against overinterpretation. What matters is context and pattern. When disruptions cluster around particular themes, authority, intimacy, ambition, dependence, they point toward underlying conflict. The unconscious does not express itself everywhere. It chooses specific pressure points. As awareness grows, these moments begin to feel different. A slip is no longer just embarrassing. It becomes informative. Forgetting becomes curious rather than frustrating. The individual may pause and ask what was happening internally at the moment of disruption. This pause alone alters the dynamic. The unconscious no longer needs to rely as heavily on interruption when it senses that attention is available. Freud believed that noticing these small events gently weakens repression. The mind learns that it can tolerate glimpses of hidden material without destabilization. Slips lose some of their urgency. Forgetting becomes less frequent. The unconscious does not need to break through as often because it is being acknowledged. In this way, everyday accidents reveal the quiet intelligence of the psyche. They are not failures of functioning, but signals of inner life at work. By listening to these signals without judgment, awareness expands. The unconscious feels less isolated, and daily life, once thought to be governed purely by habit and chance, reveals itself as a continuous dialogue between what is known and what is still waiting to be understood. Beyond slips and small accidents, the unconscious exerts a quieter, more enduring influence through repetition. Freud observed that daily life is structured less by isolated decisions than by patterns that repeat with remarkable consistency. The same types of situations reappear, the same emotional outcomes recur, and similar choices are made even when circumstances change. This repetition is not the result of habit alone. It reflects an underlying organization of experience driven by unconscious expectation and memory. Routine provides efficiency, but repetition provides familiarity. The unconscious favors what is known because the known has already been survived. Emotional familiarity feels safer than novelty, even when it limits satisfaction. This preference subtly guides choice, where one works, whom one befriends, how one responds to challenge. When one withdraws, the ego experiences these choices as personal style or preference, while the unconscious experiences them as regulation, a way to maintain emotional equilibrium. Freud emphasized that repetition often preserves early relational dynamics. The unconscious seeks environments that resonate with its internal templates, allowing it to operate with minimal adjustment. Authority may be approached with caution or defiance. Intimacy may be pursued intensely or avoided altogether. Conflict may be anticipated or provoked. These patterns feel natural because they align with expectations formed long ago. The present is shaped to fit the past. This shaping occurs through selective perception and interpretation. Events that confirm unconscious beliefs stand out. Those that contradict them fade. A neutral interaction is experienced as rejection. A minor success is discounted. The unconscious edits reality to maintain coherence with its internal narrative. The ego then constructs explanations that appear rational, unaware that the evidence itself has been filtered. Daily repetition also manifests in emotional timing. The same moments trigger the same feelings. Anxiety before rest, guilt during pleasure, tension at closeness, relief after self-denial. These sequences repeat because they restore familiar emotional balance. The unconscious recognizes these sequences as complete circuits. Beginning, escalation, and release follow a predictable arc. Stability is achieved, even if fulfillment is not. Freud noted that repetition intensifies under stress. When uncertainty increases, the mind retreats toward what it knows. Old strategies are activated automatically. The individual may feel as though they are losing flexibility, becoming more rigid or reactive. In reality, the unconscious is prioritizing safety by narrowing options. Choice gives way to compulsion because compulsion feels reliable. Importantly, repetition does not imply stagnation everywhere. People can grow in many areas while remaining fixed in others. The unconscious is selective. It repeats where emotional resolution is incomplete. Areas of life that do not touch unresolved conflict may evolve freely. This uneven development often confuses individuals who feel capable and adaptive in some domains and inexplicably stuck in others. Freud understood this asymmetry as a map of unconscious tension. As awareness increases, repetition begins to reveal itself as pattern rather than fate. The individual notices similarities across different situations and times. Recognition disrupts automaticity. When a pattern is named internally, the unconscious loses some of its invisibility. The ego gains a moment of pause, a space where response can replace reflex. This pause does not immediately dissolve repetition. It introduces choice gradually. The individual may still feel drawn toward familiar outcomes, but the pull weakens. Alternatives become thinkable. Discomfort can be tolerated without immediate retreat into old sequences. Freud believed that this tolerance marks the beginning of freedom, not the absence of unconscious influence, but the ability to relate to it consciously. Over time, As repeated patterns are met with curiosity rather than obedience, the unconscious adapts. It tests whether new responses are survivable. When they are, repetition loses its necessity. The mind no longer needs to recreate the same situations to manage inattention. Energy, once bound to maintenance, becomes available for exploration. In this sense, daily repetition is not the enemy of change. It is the record of where change is most needed. By observing the rhythms of routine and choice, awareness gains access to the unconscious logic, organizing life from within. What once felt like inevitability becomes information. And as information replaces compulsion, the mind begins to experience daily life not as a loop to be endured, but as a field of possibilities gradually opening. When the unconscious is no longer treated as a distant theory but as a living presence within everyday experience, daily life begins to reorganize itself subtly and steadily. Freud did not imagine awareness as a constant act of analysis or vigilance. He understood it as a shift in relationship, a way of living in which inner signals are noticed rather than obeyed blindly. This recognition does not remove unconscious influence. It changes how that influence is met. The difference is not dramatic, but cumulative. With awareness, reactions slow just enough to be observed. A familiar surge of irritation appears, and instead of being acted out immediately, it is recognized as something known. Anxiety arises, and instead of demanding immediate escape, it is felt as a signal rather than a command. This moment of recognition creates space. The ego no longer has to respond reflexively because it is no longer convinced that every internal event is urgent or dangerous. Freud believed that this space is where psychological freedom begins. Freedom does not mean acting without influence. It means choosing how to respond to influence. When the unconscious is acknowledged, its messages lose some of their intensity. They no longer need to shout to be heard. The mind becomes less reactive because it is less divided against itself. Inner life gains a quieter rhythm. Daily decisions begin to feel different under this condition. Choices are no longer driven exclusively by avoidance or compulsion. The individual may still feel the pull of familiar patterns, but that pull is recognized rather than mistaken for necessity. Alternatives can be considered without immediate dismissal. This consideration alone alters outcome over time. Small deviations accumulate, gradually reshaping routine. Emotional experiences also change quality. Feelings become more differentiated. Instead of a vague sense of discomfort, specific emotions emerge: sadness, anger, longing, relief. Freud understood this differentiation as progress. When emotions are named internally, they become less overwhelming. The unconscious no longer needs to compress multiple feelings into a single signal, like anxiety. Emotional life gains texture rather than intensity. Relationships respond quickly to this shift. Without rigid, unconscious expectations shaping perception, others are seen more clearly. Authority is no longer automatically threatening or idealized. Intimacy becomes less charged with fear or urgency. Conflict can be tolerated without immediate withdrawal or attack. These changes are often subtle and surprising, noticed first as a reduction in exhaustion rather than an increase in happiness. The mind does less defensive work. Freud noted that living with awareness often brings an initial sense of uncertainty. Old patterns provided predictability, even when they caused pain. As they loosen, the individual may feel temporarily unanchored. This state can be mistaken for instability. In reality, it reflects transition. The psyche is reorganizing itself without relying on familiar defenses. New forms of stability have not yet fully formed. Over time, this uncertainty gives way to a deeper sense of trust, not in outcomes, but in capacity. The individual learns that inner experience can be tolerated without collapse. Emotions rise and fall without needing immediate correction. Thoughts pass without demanding belief. The unconscious is no longer an enemy or a mystery. It becomes a source of information rather than threat. Daily life under these conditions feels less constrained. Time opens slightly. Attention is less consumed by monitoring and correction. The present moment becomes more accessible because it is no longer constantly filtered through past expectation. Freud saw this presence as a sign that repression has softened. Energy once bound to defense becomes available for engagement with reality as it is. Importantly, awareness does not eliminate difficulty. Painful emotions still arise. Conflicts still occur. What changes is the internal response. Difficulty no longer automatically triggers self-punishment or avoidance. The mind can remain with discomfort long enough for it to transform. This staying is what reduces suffering over time. The unconscious responds to being held rather than resisted. As this way of living stabilizes, daily life acquires a quiet coherence. Actions align more closely with intention. Reactions feel less surprising. The individual experiences themselves as less fragmented, less driven by forces they do not understand. Freud believed that this coherence, not constant happiness, defines psychological health. Living with awareness means accepting that the unconscious will always be active. It will continue to influence perception, choice, and feeling. The difference is that it no longer operates alone. Awareness becomes its partner rather than its opponent. And in this partnership, daily life shifts from being a stage for repetition to a space for response, calmer, slower, and more deeply inhabited from within. When waking consciousness loosens its grip, the unconscious finds its clearest path to expression. Freud famously described dreams as the time's royal road to the unconscious asterisk, not because they are dramatic or prophetic, but because they reveal the mind's hidden processes with minimal interference. During sleep, the ego's vigilance softens, defenses relax. The strict logic that governs waking thought gives way to a different order, one shaped by association, emotion, and symbolic transformation. In this altered state, the unconscious is free to speak in its own language. Dreams do not present unconscious material directly. Freud emphasized that the mind disguises what it reveals. Forbidden wishes, unresolved conflicts, and emotionally charged memories are transformed through a process he called time's dreamwork asterisk. Condensation compresses multiple meanings into single images. Displacement shifts emotional intensity from threatening ideas onto neutral symbols. Representation converts abstract feelings into visual scenes. These mechanisms protect sleep by allowing expression without awakening anxiety. The dream is a compromise between revelation and concealment. What appears strange or illogical in dreams follows precise emotional logic. A nonsensical sequence often reflects a coherent inner conflict. Characters merge, time collapses, places shift abruptly. These distortions are not errors, they are solutions. The unconscious prioritizes emotional truth over narrative clarity. It communicates what is felt rather than what is explainable. Freud believed that to understand a dream is not to decode it like a puzzle, but to follow its emotional associations gently back toward their source. Dreams often revisit themes from waking life, yet they alter them in revealing ways. A minor irritation becomes a dramatic confrontation. A fleeting desire becomes a central scene. The unconscious magnifies what consciousness minimized. It brings unfinished emotional business into focus, while defenses are down. In this sense, dreams continue the work of the psyche rather than interrupt it. Sleep is not rest from inner life. It is a different mode of engagement. Freud noted that anxiety dreams are especially instructive. When disguise fails, the dream's emotional content breaks through directly, often awakening the dreamer. These moments reveal where repression is weakest and conflict most intense. The unconscious has pressed too close to awareness. Anxiety serves its familiar function, restoring distance. Even so, the dream leaves a trace. The emotion lingers, hinting at material that seeks recognition. Recurring dreams point toward unresolved themes. When the same scenario returns night after night, the unconscious is signaling persistence. Something has not yet been integrated. The mind repeats because it has not been heard. Freud did not see these dreams as warnings of external events, but as reminders of internal tasks unfinished. The repetition continues until conditions allow the material to be processed differently. Importantly, dreams do not only express conflict, they also express wish. Freud insisted that even disturbing dreams contain elements of wish fulfillment, though often in distorted form. The wish may be simple relief, closeness, mastery, or complex and conflicted. The unconscious seeks satisfaction, but must negotiate with internal prohibitions. The dream becomes a negotiated settlement, allowing partial fulfillment without triggering awakening. As awareness grows, the relationship to dreams changes. The individual may remember them more vividly or notice emotional continuity between dream and waking life. Dreams feel less alien and more personal. They are recognized as messages from within rather than meaningless images. This recognition alone alters their function. The unconscious senses that its communications are being received. Pressure decreases. Dreams may become calmer, less urgent. Freud cautioned against rigid interpretation. Symbols are not universal codes. Their meaning emerges from personal association. What matters is not what an image represents in theory, but what it evokes emotionally for the dreamer. The unconscious speaks in a private dialect shaped by individual history. Understanding requires patience rather than certainty. When dreams are approached with curiosity rather than control, they become allies rather than intrusions. They reveal where attention is needed, where feeling has been postponed, where desire has been silenced. The goal is not to analyze every detail, but to listen for emotional resonance. Dreams soften when they are allowed to complete their communication. In Freud's view, dreaming is the mind's way of maintaining continuity between conscious and unconscious life. It prevents complete separation. By allowing disguised expression during sleep, the psyche preserves balance. The unconscious releases tension, the ego rests, and when morning arrives, the mind carries forward traces of this dialogue, subtly influencing mood, perception, and readiness for the day. In this ongoing conversation between night and waking life, the unconscious continues its work quietly, persistently, and with remarkable intelligence. When the unconscious communicates, it does not choose language as consciousness knows it. Words belong to logic, sequence, and deliberate meaning. The unconscious operates differently. It speaks through images, sensations, movements, and symbols because these forms existed before language and remain closer to emotional truth. Freud understood symbolic expression not as decoration, but as necessity. The unconscious cannot present its material directly without triggering defense. Symbol becomes the bridge between what must be expressed and what cannot yet be faced openly. Symbols are efficient. A single image can carry layers of meaning simultaneously: desire, fear, memory, and expectation condensed into one form. Where language would require explanation, symbol communicates instantly. The unconscious favors this efficiency because it operates outside linear time. It does not build arguments. It evokes states. A door, a journey, a fall, a shadow. These are not metaphors chosen consciously. They are emotional containers shaped by lived experience. Freud emphasized that symbolic thinking is the mind's original mode of expression. In early childhood, before language fully develops, experience is organized through sensation and image. Emotional meaning is attached directly to visual and bodily impressions. These early forms never disappear. They remain active beneath adult thought, re-emerging most clearly in dreams, fantasies, and moments of strong emotion. The unconscious returns to its native language because it is still the most precise way to express what it holds. What makes symbols powerful is their ambiguity. A symbol does not demand a single interpretation. It allows multiple meanings to coexist without conflict. This ambiguity protects the psyche. A wish can be partially fulfilled without being fully acknowledged. A fear can be expressed without being named. The unconscious uses this openness to bypass internal censorship. Meaning slips through disguised, maintaining emotional balance while preserving sleep and psychological stability. Freud noted that symbols often cluster around the body, movement, and space. These domains are closest to instinctual life. The unconscious speaks through sensations of pressure, expansion, enclosure, exposure. Physical environments in dreams frequently represent emotional states rather than actual places. A narrow passage may reflect restriction. An open landscape may reflect relief. The image carries feeling without explanation. The dreamer feels the meaning before understanding it. Importantly, symbols are not universal dictionaries. While certain images recur across cultures, their meaning is shaped by personal history. A house may represent safety for one person and confinement for another. Water may signify calm or threat, depending on experience. Freud insisted that interpretation must begin with individual association. The unconscious uses shared forms, but fills them with private content. The symbol's emotional charge reveals its function. Symbols also allow contradiction to exist without resolution. Love and anger can occupy the same image. Attraction and fear can coexist in a single scene. Conscious thought struggles with contradiction, often forcing clarity prematurely. The unconscious tolerates complexity. Symbolic language holds opposing emotions together, allowing them to be experienced without immediate decision. This tolerance is essential for integration. As awareness develops, the individual may begin to notice symbolic expression outside of dreams. Daydreams, sudden images, artistic impulses, and spontaneous associations all reflect unconscious communication. These moments are often fleeting, dismissed quickly in favor of rational thought. Freud viewed them as opportunities, brief openings where unconscious material surfaces without disguise. When attended to gently, they reduce the need for stronger expression later. When symbols are ignored repeatedly, the unconscious intensifies its efforts. Dreams become more vivid. Emotional reactions grow stronger. The psyche increases volume when it feels unheard. Symbolic language grows more dramatic because subtlety has failed. This escalation is not punishment, it is persistence. The unconscious seeks acknowledgement, not disruption. Listening to symbolic language does not require interpretation in the traditional sense. It requires resonance. When an image lingers, when a dream scene feels emotionally charged, attention is already doing its work. The unconscious responds to being felt more than to being explained. Understanding often follows experience, not the other way around. Freud believed that when symbols are allowed to complete their communication, they soften. Images lose intensity. Repetition decreases. The unconscious no longer needs to insist. Symbolic language becomes less urgent because its function has been fulfilled. The mind regains equilibrium, not by translating everything into words, but by allowing images to be experienced as carriers of meaning. In this way, symbolic language reveals the depth of unconscious intelligence. It shows that the psyche does not lack articulation. It speaks fluently in its own medium. By learning to recognize this language patiently, without control, awareness expands beyond words. Inner life becomes richer, more coherent, and less divided. The unconscious continues to speak, but now it does so into a space that can listen. A dream does not end when the eyes open. Freud understood dreaming as a process that extends beyond sleep, subtly shaping waking perception, emotion, and behavior long after the images have faded. Even when a dream is forgotten, its emotional residue remains active. The unconscious does not complete its work in isolation at night. It carries forward what was expressed symbolically into the texture of the following day. The boundary between sleep and waking life is far more porous than it appears. Upon waking, consciousness often rushes to reassert order. Images dissolve quickly. Logic returns. The dream may seem irrelevant or confusing, yet mood frequently shifts without explanation. A sense of heaviness, clarity, unease, or calm appears without an obvious cause. Freud saw these shifts as evidence that the dream has already done its work. Emotional material has been activated, rearranged, or partially discharged during sleep, altering the internal landscape in which waking experience unfolds. Dreams reorganize emotion by allowing expression without consequence. Wishes that could not be tolerated consciously are given symbolic form and released. Conflicts that demanded constant repression are softened through partial satisfaction or symbolic resolution. As a result, the ego wakes into a different emotional configuration. the world feels subtly changed, not because reality has altered, but because the internal balance has shifted. Freud noted that insight often arrives indirectly after dreams. A problem that felt insoluble the night before appears less rigid in the morning. A decision feels clearer without deliberate reasoning. Emotional reactions soften unexpectedly. These shifts are not accidents. They reflect unconscious processing that continued uninterrupted while consciousness rested. The mind has been working in the background, integrating associations and releasing tension beyond the reach of waking control. Even forgotten dreams exert influence. Forgetting does not erase effect. In many cases, forgetting is itself a sign that the dream contained material close to awareness. The content has been repressed again, but not without leaving a trace. The individual may feel restless, distracted, or unusually focused without knowing why. The unconscious has stirred something, even if the ego has chosen not to remember. Freud emphasized that recurring morning moods often point back to recurring dream themes. Waking anxiety, unexplained sadness, or sudden motivation may reflect nightly attempts by the unconscious to process unresolved material. When the same emotional state returns repeatedly upon waking, it suggests that the dream work has not yet achieved sufficient discharge. The psyche continues its effort night after night, adjusting form but preserving intent. The influence of dreams on waking life is also visible in association. A casual remark, a passing image, or a familiar place may suddenly feel charged during the day. These moments often echo dream imagery indirectly. The unconscious recognizes continuity even when consciousness does not. The day becomes an extension of the night's symbolic language, offering new opportunities for expression and integration. Freud observed that creativity is especially sensitive to this transition. Artists, writers, and thinkers often report ideas emerging fully formed after sleep. These ideas are not created upon waking, they are delivered. The unconscious has already done the work, arranging elements into coherence while defenses were relaxed. Waking consciousness receives the product, often without awareness of the process that produced it. Importantly, dreams can also influence behavior subtly. A person may avoid a conversation, feel drawn toward a particular activity, or experience a shift in motivation without clear reason. These inclinations often reflect unconscious adjustments made during dreaming. The psyche has tested possibilities symbolically and carries forward the emotional conclusions. Behavior follows mood before reason has time to intervene. As awareness develops, the transition from dream to waking life becomes more noticeable. The individual may pause in the morning, sensing emotional tone before engaging with the day. This pause allows unconscious material to settle rather than be overridden immediately. Freud believed that this gentle acknowledgement reduces the need for symptoms. The unconscious feels less compelled to insist when it senses that its work is being respected. Dreams lose some of their urgency when waking life becomes more receptive. When emotions expressed at night can be tolerated during the day, the psyche no longer needs to divide its labor so sharply. The boundary between dreaming and waking softens. Inner life becomes more continuous. Night and day cease to function as separate arenas and begin to operate as complementary phases of a single process. In this continuity, the unconscious finds relief. It no longer needs to compress its messages into symbolic extremes. Dreams become quieter, less dramatic, morning moods stabilize. Waking life gains depth without volatility. Freud understood this balance as a sign of integration. The mind no longer requires darkness alone to speak. It has found room within awareness to continue its work. At the end of this long inner journey, the unconscious does not vanish. Freud never imagined psychological health as silence within the psyche. He imagined it as time's completion asterisk. When unconscious material has found a path into awareness, not abruptly, not violently, but gradually and safely, its need to insist diminishes. The mind no longer has to repeat, interrupt, or alarm. What was once held apart begins to coexist. The psyche settles, not into emptiness, but into coherence. Completion does not mean that every conflict is resolved intellectually. It means that the mind has learned times contain times what it once had to avoid. Desires can be felt without immediate action. Emotions can rise without demanding escape. Memories can surface without overwhelming the present. Freud believed that this capacity to hold inner experience marks the end of the unconscious struggle, not because struggle disappears, but because it no longer needs to dominate awareness. As this shift takes place, symptoms lose their purpose. Anxiety no longer needs to signal danger, because danger is no longer misidentified. Guilt no longer needs to punish, because judgment is no longer absolute. Repetition no longer needs to recreate the past, because the past has been acknowledged. The unconscious withdraws its pressure not out of defeat, but out of relief. Its task has been fulfilled. The ego, once exhausted by constant mediation, begins to function with less effort. Attention becomes steadier. Energy is no longer consumed by internal surveillance. The mind no longer feels watched by itself. This reduction in inner strain often appears first as physical ease, deeper sleep, slower breathing, fewer bodily alarms. Freud saw this bodily quiet as a sign that psychic tension has genuinely decreased. The nervous system responds to integration immediately. With the unconscious no longer demanding constant recognition, time feels different. The present moment expands. Attention is less fragmented. The individual becomes less preoccupied with managing inner life and more available to experience life directly. Freud believed that this availability, not perpetual happiness, defines psychological freedom. One is no longer driven primarily by what must be avoided, but guided by what can be engaged. Identity also softens. Traits that once felt rigid lose their necessity. The person no longer needs to define themselves through defense. Sensitivity becomes information rather than weakness. Desire becomes movement rather than threat. Boundaries become flexible rather than fortified. The self feels less like a structure held together by tension and more like a process capable of adaptation. Importantly, this state is not permanent or static. The unconscious continues to generate material. New conflicts arise. Life introduces new demands. What changes is the relationship. The mind no longer responds to inner pressure with immediate repression or punishment. It responds with curiosity and tolerance. This response prevents accumulation. Conflicts are processed closer to the moment they arise, reducing the need for long-term storage in the unconscious. Freud understood this ongoing processing as the mature form of mental life. The psyche remains dynamic, but less divided. Consciousness and unconsciousness function as parts of a single system rather than opposing forces. Communication replaces secrecy. Signals replace symptoms. The mind no longer needs to speak in extremes to be heard. In this integrated state, rest becomes deeper, not because nothing stirs within, but because what stirs is no longer feared. Sleep becomes more continuous. Dreams become less urgent. Waking life becomes more stable. The unconscious, having been granted a voice, no longer needs to interrupt. Silence emerges not from suppression, but from satisfaction. Freud believed that when the unconscious releases its hold, the individual does not feel transformed so much as time's returned asterisk. There is a sense of familiarity not with the past, but with oneself. Inner life feels less alien. Reactions make sense. Emotional experience feels owned rather than imposed. The self becomes less mysterious because fewer parts are hidden. This quiet completion does not announce itself. There is no dramatic ending. There is simply less noise, less urgency, less inner conflict demanding resolution. Life continues, but it is no longer constantly interrupted by echoes of what has been left unresolved. The unconscious rests because it has been recognized, and in that recognition, the mind finally allows itself to slow not into stillness, but into a steady, sustainable rhythm where inner and outer life move together, no longer divided, no longer competing, simply present.